The kingdom of Nadiria stands as a testament to survival. 6 years ago, this small nation teetered on the edge of total annihilation during a brutal war, saved only by the intervention of a legendary force. That force was the Gakiju Mercenary Corps, a band of warriors whose names are whispered with both awe and terror across the continent. They're a collection of the world's strongest, each a master of their craft. Yet, a strange rumor began to circulate among the ranks and the common folk alike. A mere child had been inducted into this elite brotherhood of killers. In the bustling streets of the city, life continues under the shadow of the great spires, oblivious to the internal workings of the mercenaries who guard them. The young boy, burdened with supplies, weaves through the crowded thoroughfares. He carries himself with a quiet diligence, though he remains an outsider to the citizens around him. His path is abruptly blocked when he collides with a hulking local. The man sneers down at him, barking a demand for the boy to watch his step. With a dismissive wave, the brute scoffs at the slum brat, predicting a cold death in a ditch for one so small. His companion watches the boy depart, a flicker of concern crossing his face. He continues his solitary trek through the narrow back alleys, his mind drifting to the void of his own identity. The only anchor he possesses is the fading memory of his mother's voice, urging him to survive and find love. The weight of exhaustion and the biting chill of the stone floor finally take their toll, and he collapses. He clings to those final words of his mother, the only thing that has kept him moving until this moment. Suddenly, his eyes bolt open as a voice cuts through the haze of his fading consciousness. Someone is standing over him, calling out to see if he still draws breath. He gasps for air, his small frame trembling as he pushes himself up from the cold ground. Above him, the mercenary watches with a casual smirk, asking if the boy has finally returned to the land of the living. The man explains that he administered a potent medicinal pill to jumpstart the boy's exhausted system. Confused, the child asks if the stranger was the one who rescued him, but the warrior merely offers a hand, questioning if he is even capable of standing on his own 2 feet. He advises the boy to find a meal and some proper rest, warning that the surge of energy from the medicine is only a fleeting reprieve. With a wave of his hand, he tells the child to be careful on his journey home. The mercenary turns to leave, a carefree whistle escaping his lips as he navigates the narrow alleyway, though he grumbles under his breath about the nuisance of spiderwebs. Behind him, the boy remains rooted to the spot, watching the broad-shouldered figure depart. He suddenly calls out, stopping the warrior in his tracks. The man glances back over his shoulder, his expression one of mild curiosity at the boy's persistence. The child looks up with wide, hopeful eyes and asks if the man is his father. The question hangs in the air, leaving the mercenary completely stunned, his mouth agape in disbelief. He recoils in a fit of panicked denial, shouting that he is a single man with no children to his name. The sudden outburst sends the boy reeling back, startled by the intensity of the man's reaction. The boy softly explains that since the man was the only one to offer help, he assumed there was a connection, recalling his mother's words that a master would eventually come to his aid. The mercenary sighs, muttering about his own search for a partner and the absurdity of the situation. He listens as the child speaks of responsibility and the weight of being saved, finding the boy's logic surprisingly mature and somewhat irritating. Rubbing the back of his neck, the warrior wonders how he will ever explain this strange encounter to his comrades. A sudden thought strikes him, and he decides to set the record right with a formal introduction. He proudly declares himself as Begonia, a member of the renowned Gakiju Mercenary Corps, leaving the young boy wide-eyed with a newfound sense of wonder. Begonia explains the nature of his work, describing a mercenary group as a band of warriors who sell their strength for coin. Will listens intently, his small frame dwarfed by the seasoned fighter. Flashing a confident grin, the mercenary praises the boy's name before extending an unexpected invitation to join his own unit. He leans in, his expression both playful and serious as he awaits a reaction. He doesn't sugarcoat the reality, warning that the path is fraught with peril and the very real possibility of death. Despite the grim outlook, the boy nods, his voice steady as he accepts the weight of the choice. The child's affirmation is immediate and firm, though it draws a look of mild skepticism from the older man. He wonders if the boy truly grasps the magnitude of the life he is choosing. Deciding to put that resolve to the test, the warrior reaches for a small blade at his waist. He remarks that if the boy cannot handle even this much pressure, the conversation ends here. He draws a short dagger and presents it as a challenge, declaring it an entrance exam. Since his own heavy sword would be impossible for a child to wield, this smaller weapon will serve as the instrument of his trial. The boy stares at the blade, the sheer impossibility of the task weighing on him as he considers the man's reputation as one of the world's elite swordsmen. The mercenary adds that his group is notorious, having survived clashes with entire imperial armies. He makes the terms clear. Victory is the only way forward, or the boy will remain trapped in his current, miserable life. He offers a final chance to walk away, but the child's mind is already racing with the fear of staying stagnant. A distant memory of his mother's voice echoes in his mind, urging him to survive and find love. The thought of dying without ever changing his fate sparks a sudden, fierce rejection of his current self. His eyes snap wide, burning with a newfound intensity that catches the mercenary off guard. Seeing the shift, the warrior smiles, recognizing that the boy has finally found the spark needed to face the trial. He stands tall, the weight of his massive blade a silent threat as he warns the boy of the lethal stakes. Will, though small and trembling, stares back with a desperate clarity. To return to his former life is a death sentence in itself, making this gamble his only path forward. Because of this grim realization, the boy lunges forward, his voice cracking as he screams his refusal to perish. The mercenary remains composed, his eyes tracking the clumsy but earnest charge of his tiny opponent. The air fills with the clatter of steel as the child unleashes a flurry of desperate strikes, each one easily parried, but delivered with a ferocity that catches the veteran off guard. He finds himself retreating a step, genuinely puzzled by the sheer intensity radiating from such a small frame. Moments later, the boy stands panting, his small silhouette framed against the dust of their brief exchange. The swordsman realizes then that he is not dealing with a mere child, but something far more volatile. He watches as the boy's gaze hardens, the fear replaced by a stubborn refusal to yield. A smirk plays on the mercenary's lips as he reflects on how this test was meant to be a simple rejection, yet he may have stumbled upon a rare find. In response, he beckons the boy forward with a challenge, his own blood beginning to stir with genuine interest. He roars for the child to show him everything he has, the alleyway echoing with a sudden shift in the air. The boy tightens his grip on the hilt, his mind focused solely on the necessity of survival. Every fiber of his being is now dedicated to the singular goal of not losing this fight. Suddenly, a dark, swirling pressure erupts from the child, a manifestation of his iron will that seems to warp the very shadows around him. He declares his path with a voice that rings with newfound authority. He will become a mercenary. The veteran swordsman feels the sudden weight of this aura, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple as the atmosphere grows heavy. He is stunned by the sheer pressure emanating from a boy who, moments ago, seemed like nothing more than a stray. As he prepares to meet the next assault, he sees a flicker of his own commander's terrifying presence within the boy's eyes. Realizing that this obsession with life cannot be met with half measures, he offers a grim apology, knowing he must now fight in earnest. He watches as the boy's small hand tightens its grip on the sword hilt with white-knuckled intensity. Seeing this, the mercenary's smirk widens into a look of genuine conviction. He is now certain that this child is exactly what they need, and he silently challenges the boy to unleash every ounce of that hidden strength. However, the sudden surge of power is too much for the young body to handle, and the boy collapses abruptly onto the stone path. The mercenary stands over his fallen opponent, the silence of the alleyway returning as the dark pressure dissipates. The child lies motionless, his face pressed against the cold ground. Yet even in unconsciousness, his fingers refuse to let go of the weapon. Crouching beside him, the warrior sighs, realizing the boy has pushed himself far beyond his physical limits. He reflects on the encounter, admitting to himself that it felt nothing like a fight against a mere child. He recalls his own youth, noting that even then, he never possessed an aura so overwhelming. Standing back up, he looks down at the small figure and decides that while the boy technically lost the duel, his performance was too extraordinary to ignore. He hoists the unconscious boy onto his shoulder and begins walking through the quiet streets, determined to present this find to his commander. This chance meeting would later be remembered as the pivotal moment that set a young boy on the path to becoming a legend. The first step for the one who would eventually be known as the mercenary's disciple, a man whose actions would one day shake the very foundations of the kingdom. In the darkness of his mind, a lingering command echoed, to survive and find someone to love. It was a memory of a time when his very identity seemed to slip away, replaced by something foreign and overwhelming during the act of summoning. As the boy's eyes fluttered open, he found a young woman with pointed ears watching him closely. She noted his return to consciousness with a calm, observant gaze, her expression unreadable. He sat up, his voice trembling as he questioned his surroundings and her identity. She introduced herself as Silk, a summoner belonging to the Gakiju mercenary corps, and explained that they were currently resting at an inn while awaiting the return of their companion, Begonia. She mentioned that their group consisted of 8 members in total. The young boy looked at her with a mixture of confusion and wonder, struggling to grasp the nature of her profession. He asked simply what it was that a summoner actually did. She began to gather her power, her hands moving to demonstrate the art of summoning right there in the small room. Sensing the sudden surge of energy, the boy cried out in alarm, desperate to stop her before she could finish. Suddenly, the door burst open as Begonia stormed in, his face contorted in a furious scold. He roared at her, demanding to know if she was a fool for attempting such a feat inside a wooden inn. He continued to vent his frustration, fearing another reprimand from the vice commander, but she quickly countered by reminding him of his own drunken rampage that had leveled tavern. Amidst their bickering, the boy tentatively addressed the mercenary as his father, a title she immediately and sharply rejected. The mercenary shifted the conversation to their superior's whereabouts, and she informed him that the vice commander would be delayed a while longer. Seeing an opportunity to ease the tension, He suggested they find something to eat in the meantime. He looked up at the older man, his expression filled with doubt as he asked if his performance during the recent trial meant he had failed his entrance test. The mercenary laughed off the concern, assuring the boy that everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Moments later, they were seated in the common room as a cheerful waitress arrived with steaming plates of food. The boy's eyes widened with delight at the sight of the meal, his previous anxieties momentarily forgotten in the face of a warm feast. He stares at the feast before him with wide, sparkling eyes, clutching a knife and fork in his small hands. Begonia encourages the boy to eat his fill, noting that this might be his first time seeing such a spread. Overwhelmed by the delicious meal, the young boy abandons the utensils and begins stuffing his face with both hands, his cheeks bulging with food. Seeing the mess, the mercenary leans in with a critical eye, questioning if the child was ever taught proper table manners. The boy pauses, a morsel of food still hanging from his mouth as he looks up innocently. Realizing the boy needs guidance, the warrior turns to the elven summoner and asks her to demonstrate the correct way to use the cutlery. The child looks on with renewed enthusiasm, eager to master this new skill. She calmly picks up a fork, showing him the precise movements required to handle the food with grace. As she explains the process, the boy watches her every move, finding her focused demeanor quite charming. Impressed by how quickly the lad picks up the technique, the mercenary declares him a fast learner and offers to take him on as a formal disciple. The summoner adds that he should refer to her as his master as well, noting that the two of them already look like a pair of siblings. The conversation shifts as the elf observes that the rugged mercenary actually eats with surprising neatness. He explains that for a swordsman, etiquette and pride are inseparable, though he quickly scolds the boy for not paying attention to the lesson. He also grumbles at the elf for teasing him with the father nickname before they discuss their upcoming meeting with the vice commander. His eyes widen even further at the mention of the summoner's abilities, his excitement reaching a fever pitch as he shouts out in wonder. Because their previous demonstration was cut short by the mercenary's interference, she promises to show him more of her magic once they find a more suitable, open space. She warns the warrior not to interrupt this time, and the boy can hardly contain his joy at the prospect of seeing more summoning as they prepare to move on. The group arrived at a quiet clearing on the outskirts of the area, where the tall grass swayed gently under a solitary, sprawling tree. Begonia led the way, declaring this secluded spot perfect for their purposes. He let out a boisterous laugh, clearly proud of his young ward's progress. While he identified primarily as a swordsman, he explained that magic was an essential part of his combat repertoire, a fact that seemed to surprise the young boy. He continued his explanation, noting that every member of their mercenary band was a professional in the arcane arts. Will listened with rapt attention, his eyes wide with wonder at the realization that his mentors were even more capable than he had imagined. She stepped forward into the center of a glowing ritual circle that had begun to form on the ground. With a calm confidence, she announced that she would provide a small demonstration of her own unique abilities. As she channeled her power, a massive, ethereal Lupin head suddenly materialized from the air. Begonia instinctively pulled the boy back, urging him to stay behind him and watch the spectacle closely. They watched in awe as she stood before the fully manifested beast, a colossal white wolf that towered over her petite frame. This, she declared, was the true strength of the world's most powerful mercenary organization. She turned toward them, a hint of pride in her voice as she asked if the display was impressive. She identified the creature as a product of her Phantom Beast Princess summoning magic. He could hardly find the words to respond, his gaze fixed on the towering, majestic creature that stood patiently beside the young summoner. He tentatively reached out a hand, asking if he might be allowed to touch the beast. She gave her gentle permission, assuring him that the creature was docile and would not bite. He leaned in and embraced the wolf's massive snout, finding the legendary beast to be surprisingly soft and adorable. She watched the interaction with a soft, pleased expression, happy to see the boy's fear replaced by genuine affection. He looks up at Silk with wide, pleading eyes, begging her to teach him the secrets of summoning. She remains firm, however, explaining that while she wants to help, it is simply too soon for him to begin such advanced training. The mercenary steps in to support the idea of training, noting that one must eventually learn these things. He explains that the very first step is learning to sense mana, a process he claims took him 3 months. Yet before he can finish, the boy interjects, declaring that he has already felt it. This revelation leaves the mercenary stunned, as he finds it impossible for a novice to grasp such a concept so quickly. The boy explains that during the recent summoning, he felt a thick, viscous sensation flowing through his entire body. As the boy stands there, the sensation intensifies, making him feel as though something within him is on the verge of overflowing. He focuses intensely on this internal surge, his small frame tensing with the effort. Nearby, the mercenary watches with a growing sense of realization, remembering something he had nearly forgotten. His mind drifts back to the moment of the summoning, recalling the immense pressure that had weighed upon him. Seeing this potential, Begonia turns to Silk and asks if she happens to have a mana measurement device on her. After a moment of searching her memories, She confirms that she does indeed have one. Silk produces a small, ornate cylinder and holds it out, explaining that the device will convert the mana she provides into a measurable force. All the boy needs to do is place his palms against the base. He stares at the device as she explains how it works. The liquid inside will rise to indicate his total mana capacity. She assures him that if the level reaches even the halfway mark, it will be more than enough. Noticing his hesitation, she gently tells him there is no need for concern, as the process is entirely painless. He looks on, his heart racing with the possibility that he might actually have what it takes to become a summoner. She carefully sets the measurement device down, explaining that while the results are still uncertain, this tool is designed solely to gauge one's latent mana capacity. The young boy looks at the strange object with a mix of apprehension and curiosity, eventually nodding and agreeing to give it a try. As he focuses his energy, the liquid within the glass chamber begins to react violently, bubbling and churning as if it were boiling. Something is clearly wrong. The device was never meant to withstand such an intense reaction. Suddenly, the pressure becomes too much, and the measurement tool shatters in his hands with a sharp crack. He stares at the broken remains in stunned silence, his eyes wide with shock at the sheer force he unknowingly unleashed. Watching from a short distance, the mercenary and the summoner exchange looks of pure disbelief. The man wonders aloud if the boy's power is simply immeasurable, realizing that his initial instincts about the child's potential were entirely correct. He turns his full attention toward the boy, a new sense of purpose hardening his gaze. Addressing the child by name, he announces that a decision has been reached regarding their future together. With a confident smirk, the warrior declares his intent to train them into the strongest mercenary corps the world has ever seen. Beside him, the elven girl watches quietly, acknowledging the weight of the path that now lies before them. The carriage rattles along the uneven road, the rhythmic clatter of wheels echoing through the quiet landscape. Its heavy frame jolts with every bump, the wooden structure groaning under the strain of the journey. Inside, the mercenary remains vigilant, thanking his companions for their watchfulness as he confirms that the immediate area appears clear of any threats. He notes that with the great white wolf, Lil, keeping pace beside them, there is little reason for concern, as the beast's presence alone is a formidable deterrent. The young summoner agrees, explaining that her companion is a high-ranking magical creature, one that neither man nor monster would be foolish enough to provoke. Because of her companion's strength, the group estimates that at this steady pace, they should reach their destination at the main base within 2 days, provided they remain alert. However, the mercenary's expression shifts to one of slight unease. While the road ahead seems safe, he admits that their true challenge lies elsewhere. Beside him, the young girl sits in silence, her thoughts drifting to the vice commander and the cold reality that without his official recognition, their efforts might be in vain. Across from the boy, the armored commander delivers a blunt verdict, stating firmly that the child's induction into their ranks is simply out of the question. This harsh rejection brings to mind the events of a few hours prior, when doubts first began to surface about whether they were even in the right location. He looks up with wide, uncertain eyes, questioning the nature of the man they are about to meet. Begonia, sensing the boy's trepidation, tries to recall his own experiences with the vice commander. Popping a snack into his mouth, the mercenary admits that while the man isn't exactly difficult to deal with, he possesses a sharp intellect and a level of discipline that far exceeds their own. This seriousness often manifests as a stern authority. Begonia recalls numerous occasions where he was harshly reprimanded for even the slightest oversight. Sensing the boy's growing anxiety, Silk offers a reassuring word, confident that he will manage just fine. He takes a deep breath, steeling his resolve as they approach their destination. Upon reaching the bustling headquarters, Begonia calls out to the figure waiting for them. The man, Vice Commander Solio, immediately checks his watch, noting with a sigh that the group is precisely 15 minutes late. His gaze is cold behind his spectacles as he wonders aloud if the mercenary's chronic tardiness will ever be cured. The mercenary attempts to laugh off the reprimand, citing unforeseen circumstances, but Silk is quick to place the blame squarely on his shoulders. Stepping forward with a hesitant greeting, the boy introduces himself. Solio acknowledges him, identifying him as the orphan Begonia had mentioned in his reports. However, his tone shifts to one of absolute dismissal, stating flatly that he will not permit the boy's enlistment. To him, a child offers no strategic advantage and would only serve as a liability on the battlefield. Despite the mercenary's attempts to intervene and plead the boy's case, Solio remains unmoved, his focus entirely on the security of the region. The boy can only watch in silence, as his hopes of joining the ranks are summarily crushed. He finds himself in a stifling silence, enduring an incredibly awkward moment with the vice commander. Across the table, the high-ranking officer makes it clear that he sees no reason to force a conversation between them, leaving the boy to sit in uncomfortable quiet. Desperate to understand the rejection, the youth asks what it is about him that the commander finds so distasteful, only to be told that personal feelings have nothing to do with it. The strategist explains that while the boy may possess significant mana, his physical weakness makes him a liability to the unit. In response, the child pleads, promising to grow stronger so he won't be a burden to anyone. Without a word, the man reaches across the space between them, his gloved hand moving toward the startled boy. He challenges the child to prove his worth, demanding evidence that he won't simply be a nuisance to the mercenaries. With a cold, analytical gaze, the commander reiterates that the boy must demonstrate he is not a hindrance to their operations. Suddenly, a strange light erupts around the boy, catching him completely off guard as he cries out in confusion at the shimmering energy. The force of the spell flings him high into the air, leaving him plummeting toward a dense forest below while he screams in terror. Back at the table, the vice commander remains perfectly composed, explaining that this is his own brand of displacement magic. He dismisses the boy's confusion regarding the teleportation magic, stating that such details are irrelevant for the moment. Will, still reeling from the sudden displacement, can only stare in shock at the man who just dropped him into the wilderness. Turning his back to the boy, the vice commander explains the gravity of the situation. He reveals that the magic measuring device Will destroyed earlier was an incredibly expensive and sophisticated tool, one not easily replaced. Because of that destruction, he bluntly informs Will that he is currently viewed as a liability, a minus to their organization. However, he offers a path to redemption, a chance to bring his standing back to zero. He notes that the core component of the broken device was a rare flower, emphasizing the difficulty of the loss. To prove his worth, the commander points toward a towering, jagged spire of rock that looms over the forest floor. He commands the boy to climb to the very top and retrieve what is needed from its peak. With a cold, analytical gaze, he prepares to outline the first step of this trial, leaving no room for hesitation or complaint as the boy's test begins. The young boy dangles precariously from a high branch, his small frame silhouetted against the forest canopy. Below, the commander stands with a rigid posture, his voice carrying a stern command for the child to descend immediately. The boy, however, can only cry out for assistance as he clings to his tenuous perch. Despite his predicament, a spark of defiance flickers in his wide eyes. He looks down at the man, questioning if his worth will finally be recognized if he manages to retrieve the objective. The commander remains unmoved, his expression hidden behind the glint of his spectacles. He dismisses the notion, convinced that such a feat is fundamentally beyond the capabilities of a mere child. Ignoring the doubt, the boy scrambles with desperate energy, his fingers digging into the rough bark as he tries to find a foothold. Suddenly, his grip fails. With a sharp gasp, he tumbles through the air, his hands clawing fruitlessly at the jagged rock face before he hits the forest floor with a dull thud. He pushes himself up from the dirt, his face set in a mask of grim determination. The commander looms over him, suggesting that the task is far too difficult and that there is no shame in surrendering. The boy's response is a fierce growl, a vow that he will never give up. The man continues his cold assessment, explaining that without specialized training, even a seasoned adult would fail this trial. As he speaks, the boy's mind drifts back to his brutal encounter with Begonia, drawing strength from the memory of that struggle. A strange, dark energy begins to coil around his small form, radiating outward in jagged pulses. He focuses on the churning sensation deep within his gut, channeling that sludge into his limbs. The commander's composure finally cracks, his eyes widening in genuine shock at the sudden manifestation of power. He feels a peculiar sensation of weightlessness washing over him, his body becoming even lighter than it had been during his previous battle. He clenches his fist, sensing the raw potential coursing through his veins. With an explosive burst of speed, he launches himself forward, becoming a blur of motion that tears through the underbrush. The sheer momentum is overwhelming, and he realizes with a start that he can no longer bring himself to a halt. He slams violently into the trunk of a massive tree, the impact splintering the wood and sending a jolt through his small frame as his uncontrolled dash comes to a sudden, painful halt. Gasping for air, the boy hits the forest floor with a dull thud, his momentum finally spent as he groans in discomfort. As he struggles to find his footing, the vice commander approaches, his expression unreadable behind his spectacles. Solio explains that magic is not a force to be left to whim or instinct, but a tool that must be consciously mastered rather than just released. The commander gestures toward the boy's chest, noting that he has already learned to sense the sludge within. The next step, he instructs, is to consciously direct that internal power to flow through every limb and fiber of his being, rather than letting it pool in one place. He continues his lecture, revealing that the boy has likely been subconsciously suppressing this immense, innate energy his entire life. A mental image forms of the power, circulating from the crown of his head to the tips of his toes, a circuit of raw potential that needs to be felt and controlled. Taking the lesson to heart, the boy closes his eyes and offers a quiet word of thanks to his mentor. He focuses inward, repeating the command to himself. Let the energy flow, let it circulate through his entire body. Nearby, Begonia watches with a sharp, expectant grin as the air around the child begins to hum with tension. With a sharp exhale, the boy tenses his muscles, his gaze locking onto his target with newfound clarity and determination. He launches himself forward in a controlled burst of motion, his hand outstretched toward a cluster of delicate herbs growing near the base of a distant tree, moving with a speed that defies the eye. With a triumphant cry, he successfully plucks the plants from the earth, though the sudden cessation of his incredible speed sends him tumbling head over heels across the grass as he struggles to break. Before he can strike the ground again, the vice commander appears in a flash of movement, catching the exhausted boy securely in his arms. Solio looks down at his charge, acknowledging the successful, if clumsy, execution of the technique as the trial concludes. He looks down at the herbs in his hand, confirming the boy's success. Will, still catching his breath, exclaims with pure joy that he managed to retrieve them. He reflects on his initial intentions, confessing that he had considered leaving the child at an orphanage. Yet, seeing the boy tackle such an impossible task with his life on the line changed his perspective. He acknowledges that while the boy has an innate sense for magic, success wasn't guaranteed. It was the boy's willingness to listen and apply his guidance that truly made the difference. Looking directly at the young boy, he speaks with a newfound respect. He formally addresses Will, stating clearly that he now recognizes the boy's worth and potential. He observes the immediate impact of his words as a bright smile spreads across the child's face. Will offers a sincere word of thanks, to which the man simply nods, suggesting they begin their journey back now that the task is complete. They soon find themselves in a carriage rattling along the road, where the boy watches curiously as his mentor pens a message. When asked, the man explains he is writing a report to the commander. The boy wonders aloud if this leader is a frightening individual, but he is assured that the commander is actually quite a pleasant man. Far away from the traveling carriage, in a dimly lit hall, the recipient of the letter sits in silence. As he reads the report, a sharp, predatory grin spreads across his face, hinting at a nature far more intense than the vice commander's description suggested. The boy's mind drifted back to a cold, harsh memory. A stern old man loomed over him, his voice dripping with venom as he claimed that having been raised by a cruel elder himself, he was incapable of love. He dismissed the child as a monster, leaving him with the bitter realization that he was unwanted and unloved. He was pulled from the depths of that nightmare by a gentle voice. Solio, the vice commander, leaned in with a kind smile, announcing that they had finally reached their destination. For the young boy, this moment felt like the true beginning of a dream he never thought possible, a stark contrast to the darkness of his past. With a gasp of pure wonder, he pressed himself against the glass, his eyes widening at the sight before him. The sheer scale of the structure left him breathless, a magnificent sight that promised a world far beyond the cramped and lonely places he had known before. Standing tall against the sky, the mercenary headquarters was less a building and more a sprawling fortress. Its white stone walls and soaring towers dominated the landscape, marking the start of a new chapter in his life that felt almost too grand to be real. The heavy doors swung open with a resonant click, inviting them into the heart of the stronghold. He dashed forward, his small feet pattering against the polished floor as he entered the foyer. Waiting for them was Begonia, who called out a boisterous greeting to both the vice commander and the young newcomer. His face lit up with a welcoming grin. He stopped in his tracks, his gaze sweeping across the vast space. It finally began to sink in. This magnificent place was the home of the mercenary corps, and he was actually there. He couldn't help but exclaim at the sheer size of what he called a house, prompting a chuckle from his companions. Begonia explained that this was their main base, situated right in the heart of the royal capital, while Solio reminded them that the commander was already waiting for their arrival. Moving further inside, they were joined by Silk, her presence as calm and focused as ever. Begonia watched the interaction with a hint of surprise, noting how the usually stern vice commander's expression softened in the boy's presence, while Silk introduced herself as the commander's disciple to the overwhelmed child, explaining that this massive structure housed all 8 mercenary groups. They ascended a grand staircase that led toward a set of massive, ornate doors. The interior was even more cavernous than the outside suggested, a hall of stone and banners that made the boy feel small, yet strangely at home in its vastness. He stood before the threshold, the realization sinking in that this place would be his home, starting today. His eyes widened, reflecting the sheer scale of the transition from the lonely alleys to this grand fortress. Looking up at his guide, the boy questioned if they were truly meant to enter, while the mercenary noted the thick aura of magic bleeding through the walls, assuring him that the man within was not a threat. Beyond the heavy doors, dark, wispy tendrils of raw power coiled across the floor like living shadows, a testament to the strength of the individual waiting inside. As the doors creaked open, they were met by the imposing figure of the commander, a massive beastman who welcomed them back with a low, rumbling growl. The beastman was Rock, the leader of the Gakuto mercenary corps, who lounged with predatory grace and remarked that his subordinate had brought back quite an intriguing find. The young boy trembled under the weight of the commander's presence, prompting the lion man to apologize for his unintentional display of intimidation before asking about the child's origins. Begonia stepped forward, explaining that he had discovered the boy in a remote back alley and was now formally requesting his induction into their ranks, vouching for the child's undeniable magical potential, which surpassed even their own summoner. The commander leaned in, acknowledging the boy's raw talent, but ultimately dismissing the request, stating that the shrimp was simply too young and inexperienced to join them. Stunned by the rejection, the boy felt the cold sting of isolation returning. while his mentor desperately tried to plead his case one last time. He stands in silence, absorbing the weight of the commander's decree. Rock makes it clear that an official place in the Corps is reserved for those who can defend themselves, urging the boy to find the strength he currently lacks if he ever hopes to truly belong. He feels the heavy pressure of a massive palm as Rock reaches out, offering a glimmer of hope amidst the rejection. The commander decides to take him on as an apprentice, promising to look after him and oversee his development personally. The commander then turns to his subordinates, ordering Begonia to show the boy to the baths and Silk to find him some decent clothes. He makes sure the lad understands that life here isn't a charity. Every meal must be paid for with sweat and labor as a trainee. He soon finds himself clean and refreshed, though the borrowed clothes hang loosely off his slight frame. As he wanders the halls, a delicious scent leads him toward the source of his next challenge, reminding him of the commander's warning about the work that lies ahead. He steps into the heat of the kitchen and introduces himself to the head chef, Warduck. The burly cook stops his chopping to stare down at the tiny apprentice, skeptical that someone so small could possibly survive the demands of the Gakuju Corps' kitchen. War reflects on the strict code of the mercenary band. To earn his place, he must prove his worth through labor, for there is no room for those who do not contribute. He takes this lesson to heart, eagerly serving a steaming plate of food to his companions. Begonia and Silk watch in mild amusement as the boy embraces his new role with infectious enthusiasm. His efforts do not go unnoticed by the leadership. The commander offers a boisterous word of praise, acknowledging the boy's growth as an apprentice, while the vice commander observes the scene with his usual stoic calm. Later, they sit together as a family. He savors every bite, the warmth of the meal and the company a stark contrast to the cold, lonely life he once knew. Nearby, the rest of the crew, including the burly chef Warduck and the high-ranking officers, share in the camaraderie. The clinking of glasses and the smell of hearty food fill the hall. A quiet moment of reflection washes over him. He feels a profound sense of belonging and a growing desire to be even more helpful to those who have taken him in. As the meal winds down, the atmosphere shifts toward business. The vice commander presents a new request to the commander, noting that the local knights seem to be shorthanded. He suggests that the task is minor enough that the commander's personal involvement isn't required, proposing that Silk or Begonia could easily handle the matter instead. However, the commander has a different plan. He suddenly stands, announcing that he will handle the mission personally and, to everyone's shock, declares that he is taking the boy along with him. Before anyone can protest, the massive warrior scoops him up and bolts toward the exit. The boy can only cling on in wide-eyed terror as he is whisked away on his first official assignment. He is being defended by a man in glasses who argues vehemently that a first mission is far too premature for a child of his age and experience. Despite the protest, the boy finds himself high above the cobblestone streets, clutched in the commander's massive arm as they traverse the city rooftops in a single, impossible bound that leaves him breathless with wonder. Landing with a heavy thud, the young apprentice struggles to keep his footing, his face turning a shade of green from the sudden exertion, while the commander explains that such a feat was merely a simple application of physical enhancement, though his intense expression is enough to unsettle the child. He questions the reason for being dragged along so abruptly, only to be told by the towering warrior that this is a vital part of his training. If he cannot protect himself, he has no place in their world. The commander then reveals the true nature of their task. They are hunting a criminal responsible for a string of recent kidnappings, and he expects the boy to play his part in the capture. Seeing the mixture of fear and determination in the child's eyes, the veteran warrior decides that now is the perfect time to impart a new technique, one that will be essential for the hunt ahead. Nearby, a desperate man flees through the narrow alleys, unaware that the young apprentice is already moving into position, recalling the lessons of focus and movement he was just taught. The commander's voice echoes in his mind, explaining the concept of the magic bullet, a technique that requires focusing one's entire magical reserve into a single, concentrated point to achieve maximum impact. He attempts to channel his energy, feeling the mana flow through his limbs while simultaneously trying to condense it, though the process proves far more difficult than he anticipated as his brow furrows in concentration. With a roar of encouragement from his mentor to maintain his focus, the boy leaps into the air, silhouetted against the moon as he pursues his target across the rooftops, desperate to manifest the power he was just shown. He stares in disbelief, unable to comprehend why the commander of the Beastguard Corps is personally involved in such a pursuit. As he hurtles through the air, the boy focuses every ounce of his will on physical enhancement to bridge the gap, repeating a mantra of concentration as he visualizes the power coiling within him. The criminal can only gasp in shock as the young apprentice streaks toward him with unexpected speed, though the boy himself realizes he may have applied too much force in his desperation. Tumbling through the sky, he refuses to let the momentum go to waste and begins channeling his mana into a single point, unleashing a strike with a cry of magic bullet in a desperate bid to be useful. A sudden impact echoes through the streets, leaving the kidnapper incapacitated as the commander and the chef look on. The commander acknowledges the boy's success, while the burly cook expresses genuine surprise at the feat before they prepare to hand the criminal over to the authorities. Seeking validation, the child asks if his efforts truly helped, receiving a boisterous affirmation that he will only become more vital as his strength grows. Filled with a new sense of purpose, he pledges to dedicate himself to daily training as they walk through the quiet, moonlit town. His expression is one of quiet determination, a silent vow to work harder than ever before to meet the expectations of his new companions. 1 month passes in the blink of an eye, finding the mercenary and the summoner gathered for a serious discussion. The veteran warrior urges them to begin their meeting, his focus entirely on the progress and future of their young charge. Begonia and Silk stand together, their expressions grave as they discuss the young boy's relentless schedule. They realize that Will, the child they have come to cherish, is pushing himself far too hard, taking on more than any child should. They recall seeing him everywhere, waking up early to assist Warduck in the kitchen, and even spending his precious free time practicing his swordsmanship until he's exhausted. It is clear to them that he doesn't know when to stop. The mercenary points out that the boy simply doesn't understand the concept of rest. He firmly believes it is their responsibility as the adults in his life to guide him and show him that he doesn't have to earn his place every second of the day. With a determined look, he decides on a plan. He tells Silk that they need to get the boy out of this environment and take him somewhere he can just be a child. He finds the boy diligently sweeping the floors with a broom nearly as tall as he is. When told that he is forbidden from working today and should go outside to play instead, the child looks up in utter bewilderment. The child begins to protest, listing the long queue of chores he still has to complete, from cleaning the upstairs hallway to assisting with the midday meal. Begonia dismisses these concerns, insisting that he will handle everything himself. He gently but firmly takes the broom from the boy's small hands. Despite the mercenary's good intentions, the child remains frozen, unsure of how to react to this sudden change in his routine. Tears well up in the boy's large eyes as a deep-seated fear surfaces. He trembles, confessing his belief that if he isn't useful to everyone, he won't be allowed to stay with them anymore. Moments later, outside the mercenary headquarters, Begonia throws his hands up in exasperation. He laments how his attempt to be kind somehow turned him into the villain who made a child cry, while Silk watches the scene with a quiet, knowing gaze. She leans in close to the sobbing boy, her voice soft and reassuring. She tells him that he has already done more than enough, and that his presence alone is a great help to them all, slowly easing the heavy burden of his worries. She watches as the mercenary offers words of comfort, reminding the boy that his presence is valued by everyone in the group and that no one considers him a burden. He speaks with a rare softness, ensuring the child understands that he is not just a tool to be used, but a member of their circle. The mercenary then suggests that the two of them should head out into the city together for a change of pace, hoping the fresh air will do the boy some good. As she approaches him, the boy looks down at his attire, realizing with a start that he is still wearing his work apron and possesses no other garments to wear for an outing. Seeing his distress, she reflects on her own oversight, remembering that she had simply handed him whatever clothes seemed to fit without considering his need for a proper wardrobe of his own. She quickly decides that their first stop will be to buy him new clothes, brushing aside his timid concerns about the cost and insisting that he shouldn't worry about such things today. Leading him through the massive iron gates of the estate, she declares that this day is dedicated entirely to him. They soon arrive in a bustling district where the architecture is grand and the streets are lined with pristine, multi-story buildings. The boy gazes in wonder at the shimmering streets, prompting her to explain that they have entered the noble quarter of the city, a place of wealth and high fashion. Once inside a high-end boutique, he stares tentatively at the fine fabrics and intricate designs hanging before him, feeling entirely out of place. He begins to protest, overwhelmed by the exorbitant prices on the tags, but she cuts him off by dumping a massive pile of outfits into his arms and commanding him to start trying them on immediately. She stands before a towering stack of garments, her mind made up. When the boy asks if he truly has to try every single piece, she simply nods, explaining that there is no other way to know what will truly suit him. Resigned to his fate, he begins the arduous task of changing. He emerges first in a formal black suit, complete with a crisp white shirt and a neatly tied bow tie. Looking at his reflection with a mix of curiosity and discomfort, he asks for her opinion. She is immediately charmed, declaring the look adorable and a perfect fit for his features. However, the search continues as she becomes more discerning. She dismisses one outfit for being far too casual for their needs, and another for failing to capture the essence of a proper magic user. With a wave of her hand, she calls for the next set. The parade of styles becomes increasingly eccentric. One ensemble, reminiscent of a certain mercenary's flashy attire, is deemed too gaudy, while another makes him look like a miniature villain. Even a pair of dark sunglasses doesn't pass her strict inspection, and the word next becomes a constant refrain. By the time he is draped in an oversized wizard's hat and a heavy cloak, the boy's energy is visibly flagging. He asks if there are any more left, and she promises that the very next one will be the final choice. He steps out one last time, now wearing a sophisticated white coat with dark accents and a high collar. The transformation is striking, and as he asks his mentor for her thoughts, she is momentarily speechless, her eyes widening in genuine surprise at how well the outfit complements him. Having finally made their selections, she leads the way out of the boutique, exhaling a sigh of satisfaction. Though the process was long, she feels the time was well spent. Behind her, the boy expresses his gratitude for the gifts, though he remains somewhat overwhelmed by the entire experience. He trudges along, his shoulders slumped from the day's exertions. To him, if this is what a holiday feels like, he would much rather be back at work. Sensing his fatigue, she stops and looks back at him. She then poses a question, asking if he has ever had the chance to visit the great castle. The boy looks up, his eyes wide with surprise at the sudden change in topic. Pointing toward the horizon where the massive spires of the royal palace dominate the skyline, she suggests they take the opportunity to go sightseeing. The grand architecture of the capital's heart looms before them, a stark contrast to the humble life the boy has known. The young boy and his mentor step into the sprawling courtyard of the royal castle, where the air is thick with the scent of the kingdom's most famous flower beds. He gazes around in awe, noting that this place is even more magnificent than the story suggested. He takes in the sight of the elegant nobility strolling through the gardens, a stark contrast to the world he knows. Despite the beauty surrounding him, a flicker of hesitation crosses his face as he realizes how out of place he truly is in such a refined environment. Turning to his mentor, he addresses her with a quiet question, but she remains focused on their path. She reminds him that they are here on business and that there are other matters requiring their immediate attention. She pauses, catching the shadow of doubt in his eyes and asking if something is bothering him. He quickly forces a smile, dismissing her concern and insisting that everything is perfectly fine. He points toward another section of the garden, his voice bright with forced enthusiasm as he claims the view over there is even more stunning. He seems desperate to maintain the facade of a simple, happy tourist. Their moment of forced levity is interrupted by the arrival of Duke Bosco, a portly nobleman who boasts loudly about his financial contributions to the garden's splendor. He looks down his nose at the pair, his gaze landing on the boy with immediate, undisguised contempt for what he perceives as a common brat. The nobleman doesn't stop at insults. With a cruel grunt, he delivers a sharp kick that sends the boy sprawling onto the stone path. He snarls for the child to get out of his way, treating him as nothing more than a nuisance to be cleared from his sight. She cries out in shock, her eyes widening as she watches her disciple hit the ground. The sudden, unprovoked violence leaves her momentarily stunned before a cold fury begins to take hold. He pushes himself up, trying to reassure his master that he isn't badly hurt, though his voice wavers. Meanwhile, the Duke recognizes her, sneering as he addresses her by her title, the Phantom Beast Princess, showing no remorse for his actions. She glares at the nobleman with lethal intensity, her voice dropping to a dangerous tone as she identifies the boy as her disciple. The Duke remains unimpressed, arrogantly questioning if she truly knows who he is, oblivious to the storm he has just unleashed. She is met with the Duke's blustering rage as he bellows about his noble standing, demanding respect for the name of Bosco, one of the few ducal houses in the kingdom. He asserts his position at the very pinnacle of the aristocracy, his face contorted with a sense of unearned superiority. In response, she snaps back, her voice sharp with indignation, declaring that his status is no excuse for kicking a child. Beside her, the young boy remains huddled on the ground, clutching his side as the argument escalates. The nobleman sneers, dismissing her words and extending his insults to the entire mercenary band, labeling them as nothing more than low-born trash with no place in his presence. He is interrupted by the boy, who slowly looks up with a bruised but defiant expression, stating that while he can endure being kicked, he will not stay silent while his companions are slandered. The child pulls himself to his feet, his eyes burning with a newfound resolve as he refuses to let the mercenaries be insulted. The Duke, incensed by the brat's defiance, barks an order to his guards to seize the pair, but the elven woman steps forward, firmly identifying the boy as her disciple. She looms over the scene, her presence suddenly heavy and suffocating, as she issues a cold warning that anyone who dares to lay a hand on her student will face the consequences. Her gaze narrows, a single eye shimmering with a dangerous, predatory light as she dares the guards to take even one more step toward them. They freeze in their tracks, sweat pouring down their faces as they are paralyzed by the sheer killing intent radiating from her. With a final, sharp command, she tells them to vanish before her patience truly runs out. The Duke stammers, his face pale and slick with perspiration as he tries to reclaim his authority, desperately claiming that she is merely a commoner from a foreign nation and nothing to be feared. Ignoring his desperate bluster, she sighs and turns her back on the noble, muttering about what a nuisance the encounter has been before leading the boy away from the garden. She leads the way out, the Duke's impotent rage echoing behind them. He screams about commoners and his son, but his words fall on deaf ears as they leave the estate behind. Looking away, she sighs, frustrated that their rare day of rest has been thoroughly spoiled by such a tedious and loud encounter. When the boy asks about the woman from before, she identifies her as Sharno, a notorious troublemaker, even among the ranks of the mercenaries. She recalls the woman's terrifying reputation, noting that the Duke's grudge stems from the time Sharno nearly beat his son to death. The boy's concern shifts to her well-being as he asks if her stomach still hurts from the blow she took earlier. Surprised by his worry, she explains that she's perfectly fine, having maintained a constant state of physical reinforcement magic to dull the impact. Her gaze sharpens as she realizes the boy has been doing something similar, constantly circulating his own mana without even realizing the difficulty of the feat. He beams with excitement, explaining that his daily practice has become a source of genuine joy rather than a chore. She watches him in silence, stunned by the sheer speed of his development and his unnatural talent for mana manipulation. Deciding it is time to see the full extent of his potential, she proposes they visit a place where his specific magical aptitudes can be officially measured. She explains that they must discover the nature of his magic, whether he will cast flames, command water, or perhaps master complex arts like the Vice Commander's teleportation or her own summoning. Since it is his day of rest, she offers to settle the matter immediately at the testing site, though she leaves the final choice to him. He reacts with pure, unbridled enthusiasm, his eyes shimmering with the prospect of gaining more power. When he asks if this knowledge will truly make him stronger, she gives him a firm affirmation, prompting him to shout his readiness to depart. She smiles, extending a hand as she notes that she expected nothing less, and prepares to lead the way. They soon arrive at a towering, stone structure that looms over the surrounding city streets. She gestures toward the impressive spire, identifying it as the Magic Association, the very place where his potential will finally be measured. He gazes up at the massive building, his face lit with a mixture of awe and anticipation. The words Magic Association hang in the air as he prepares to step into a new world of arcane discovery, wondering what secrets his own mana might hold. Will and Silk stand before the grand entrance of the Magic Association, where the boy eagerly asks what kind of powerful magic he might learn. His master explains that this is the place where they will finally determine his true magical aptitude. Inside the building, the arrival of a high-profile guest sends the staff into a frenzy as they scramble to prepare the finest room. A young attendant finally approaches, bowing deeply and apologizing for the delay, while clearly flustered by the presence of such a renowned figure. She calmly states her business, requesting a private room to evaluate her disciple's potential, which causes the attendant's eyes to widen in shock at the revelation that she has taken on a student. The young boy feels the weight of dozens of staring eyes and hushed whispers questioning if a mere child could truly be the apprentice of the legendary Phantom Beast Princess. As they're led down the hallway, the staff members can't hide their disbelief at how incredibly young and unassuming the boy appears to be. He looks up at her, asking if she is truly as famous as the staff's reaction suggests, and she simply confirms her high standing while reminding him that he is now her responsibility. They are shown into a vast, opulent chamber filled with books and magical instruments before the attendant bows out, leaving them alone in the quiet room. She turns to him, announcing that before they begin the testing, they must first engage in some study, a concept that seems to leave the boy tilting his head in confusion. Adjusting her glasses, she explains that since she hasn't had the chance to teach him the fundamentals yet, he must take this opportunity to learn his first real lesson in the ways of magic. The attendant at the Magic Association watched with envy as the young boy was led away for private instruction. To receive personal tutoring from a figure as renowned as the Phantom Beast Princess was a luxury few could dream of. Inside the quiet study, the Elven Master commanded her disciples full attention, signaling the start of his formal education. She began by clarifying the nature of the techniques he had already been practicing. Skills like physical enhancement and the manifestation of magic bullets were merely fundamental applications of raw mana, accessible to many but serving only as the foundation for true sorcery. Moving to a chalkboard, she illustrated the two primary branches of magical aptitude. The first and most common was elemental magic, where practitioners manipulated natural forces like fire and water, the path followed by the vast majority of mages. The second branch, she explained, consisted of special magics that defied elemental classification. This rare category included the Vice Commander's ability to teleport and her own legendary summoning arts, which allowed her to call forth powerful beings like the Great White Wolf. She emphasized the sheer rarity of such gifts, noting that only 1 in 10,000 individuals possessed the potential for special magic. The boy stared at her in disbelief, the weight of those odds settling heavily upon him as the lecture drew to a close. To determine his own path, she presented a large, ornate crystal ball and instructed him to place his hand upon its surface. He hesitated for a moment, his heart racing with the hope that he might truly follow in her footsteps as a summoner. As his palm made contact with the cold glass, the sphere reacted instantly. Swirls of ethereal energy began to churn within the depths of the crystal, responding to the latent power residing within the child. She watched the reaction with a knowing look, resting a hand gently on his head. She confessed that she had suspected this outcome ever since the day he first laid eyes on her summoned beast, sensing a kindred spirit in the young orphan. The verdict was final. He possessed a clear aptitude for summoning magic. The boy's eyes widened in pure, unadulterated joy as the realization dawned on him that his dream was within reach. He let out a triumphant shout, throwing his arms up in celebration at being just like his master. Seeing his enthusiasm, she decided it was time to move beyond theory and attempt the actual summoning of a magical creature. He and his master are greeted warmly by the young attendant as they return to the association. The staff member is visibly surprised to see them back so soon, his eyes wide with curiosity. The attendant inquires about the boy's magical aptitude, though privately he remains skeptical. He dismisses the disciple as just another child, doubting that anyone so young could truly possess significant power despite his association with a legendary summoner. His skepticism is instantly shattered when Silk calmly reveals the truth. The boy possesses the rare talent for summoning magic. The attendant's jaw drops, his hands clasped in a mixture of awe and disbelief. He stammers in shock, realizing that summoning is an incredibly rare gift, even among the most specialized magics. To have the same aptitude as the Phantom Beast Princess herself is a revelation that leaves him reeling. A sudden, sharp shift in the man's demeanor occurs as he watches them walk away. His eyes narrow with calculation as he realizes the immense potential before him, resolving to do whatever it takes to win the young summoner's favor. Moments later, they descend into a massive underground training facility. The boy gazes up in awe at the vast space, while Silk explains that the entire chamber is reinforced with powerful barriers to withstand the intensity of high-level magical practice. As they reach the center of the hall, Silk prepares to begin the lesson, her focus shifting entirely to the task at hand. She considers the next step, questioning whether they should start by summoning a new familiar. Their presence does not go unnoticed, as a boisterous crowd of mages and warriors quickly gathers. They shout out in excitement, some clamoring for the princess's autograph while others foolishly hope to test their strength against her. Ignoring the growing commotion, she centers her energy, and a glowing magic circle erupts beneath her feet. The air hums with a sudden surge of power as the ritual begins. With a command to clear the area, the majestic white wolf, Lil, manifests from the light. The massive beast stands protectively beside its master, its presence alone enough to silence the surrounding crowd. The massive beast's presence leaves the gathered students in awe, its sheer power radiating through the hall. One dark-haired boy marvels at the sight of a real Fenrir, while Will's eyes sparkle with excitement, his mind racing with the possibilities of his own future as a summoner. However, the staff member nearby seems more concerned with the chaos, noting that Silk had mentioned dispersing the crowd, not just showing off. He flinches as a terrified scream echoes through the hall, his heart aching for the mages fleeing in panic from the giant wolf. Silk, however, remains entirely unmoved by the commotion she caused, coldly remarking that mages are a resilient lot who wouldn't die even if they were killed, so there is no need for such misplaced pity. She shifts the focus back to the lesson, presenting a small tool and explaining the fundamental concept of a magic circle. With a stern warning, she illustrates the grave dangers of the craft. If a summoning is botched or the caster's focus wavers, the very creature called forth from the void will turn and attack its master without hesitation. Continuing her lecture, she explains that a magic circle serves as a vital catalyst, allowing a practitioner to manifest powers far exceeding their innate magical capacity. By channeling energy through these intricate patterns, a summoner can bridge the gap between their own limits and the vast requirements of high-level spells, effectively amplifying their reach. She then demonstrates the final step, placing a hand upon the floor to begin the inscription of the circle. She instructs Will to visualize drawing a beast from another world, to pour his mana into the pattern, and to chant the words of kinship summoning. Though visibly nervous, he nods in understanding, ready to attempt his first true feat of magic under her watchful eye. The young boy crouches low as a violent whirlwind of magical energy erupts around him, his small frame trembling under the sudden, crushing pressure of the ritual. Seeing his distress, the elven master calls out his name in alarm, asking if he can hold on. He can barely respond, gasping through the sweat that his magic power is being ripped away from him all at once. She watches with growing dread, realizing the ritual is demanding an impossible, almost bottomless amount of mana. The boy struggles against a wave of intense nausea, his body reeling from the sudden, violent depletion of his internal energy. Despite the physical toll, he ranges his teeth and tightens his grip, his eyes burning with a desperate resolve to see this summoning through to the end. Sensing the escalating danger, the summoner calls her great white wolf to her side, the massive beast baring its teeth as the air grows heavy with anticipation. She frantically calculates the risks in her mind, noting that the boy is burning through more than half of his massive mana reserves. She worries that the intricate magic circles she prepared might be bypassed, potentially summoning a dragon, a griffin, or even one of the legendary 7 calamities that would be impossible to control. With a final, guttural cry, the boy unleashes the stored energy, invoking the ancient rite of kinship summoning as a pillar of light erupts from the ground. The elven girl commands her wolf to stay alert, her heart racing as she prepares for the arrival of a potentially world-shaking entity. The blinding light begins to fade, but instead of a thunderous roar, a soft, rhythmic, and distinctly squishy sound echoes through the clearing. Her expression of terror instantly melts into one of utter bewilderment as she finds herself staring at something unexpectedly small, letting out a cry of delight at how adorable the creature is. She watches, her expression a mask of disbelief as the boy cradles the small, gelatinous blob. It feels cool and pliable in his hands, a far cry from the terrifying entity she had anticipated. The creature is revealed to be a slime, widely regarded as the most pathetic and weakest of all magical beasts. Considering the massive amount of mana he expended, she explains that he could have easily summoned a monster capable of laying waste to the world. She offers him the chance to try again, but he refuses, insisting that he prefers this little one. Seeing his resolve, she instructs him to bestow a name upon it. He gazes at the creature, understanding that if it accepts the name he gives, their contract will be permanently forged. With a bright, hopeful smile, he declares that its name shall be Io. A sudden, brilliant flash of light erupts as the naming ritual takes hold. When the glow fades, the small slime has claimed a spot atop his head, signaling its acceptance. He cheers in triumph, while she confirms that the contract is indeed complete. She then proposes that they attempt a second summoning immediately. She remains skeptical, noting that a lone slime offers little in the way of protection or combat prowess. However, given his extraordinary mana reserves, she believes he might be capable of sustaining a second familiar. He agrees, his eyes filled with a new sense of determination as he prepares himself. He hopes that this next attempt will bring forth a truly formidable ally to stand alongside him and Imu. He reaches out once more, but as the magic begins to swirl, the strain is far greater than before, the air growing heavy with the weight of the summoning. He stares at the creature that emerged from the light, a small, bandaged goblin clutching a crude spear. The creature grunts in confusion, questioning who stands before it. Silk observes from the side, noting that while it is a goblin, a low-tier monster on par with a slime, it is a successful summon. Will, slightly unsure, asks his mentor if he should attempt the ritual again to find something more formidable. Despite the creature's lowly status, he decides to embrace the connection, declaring that this goblin is the one he wants. He is simply grateful that the creature responded to his call, a sentiment that seems to catch the small warrior off guard. Seeing his genuine enthusiasm, she offers a soft smile of approval. If he is satisfied with his new companion, then she is content to let the contract stand. He then turns back to the goblin, asking for its name to finalize their bond. The creature hesitates before rasping out a name, Kaburo. With the name spoken, he cheers, celebrating the official formation of their contract. Meanwhile, Silk watches in silence, her mind racing with analytical thoughts. While a slime and a goblin are typical for a novice, the sheer amount of mana expended to bring them forth suggests a power far beyond his years. She continues to study him, realizing that the boy himself is a greater enigma than the creatures he serves. Will, oblivious to her scrutiny, beams with joy as Imu rests atop his head. 2 weeks pass in the blink of an eye at the academy. From within the stone walls, his voice rings out, playfully scolding Imu for trying to eat everything in sight. Outside on the training grounds, the small goblin, Kaburo, relentlessly thrusts his spear into the air. He watches the display with Imu, encouraging the slime to follow the goblin's example of hard work and dedication. He praises the goblin's tireless effort, but the creature remains humble. Kaburo acknowledges his own weakness, stating that his lack of natural strength is exactly why he must train harder than anyone else to become a worthy protector. Inspired by the goblin's resolve, he vows that they will all grow stronger together. With Imu bouncing excitedly and Kaburo's spear held high, the trio prepares to face whatever challenges the future holds. He is suddenly interrupted by a boisterous young woman who claims to have finally found the rumored brat. Will looks up in surprise, his slime familiar perched atop his head, as the stranger looms over him with a confident, toothy grin. As she introduces herself as Charles, the boy can only blink in confusion, having no idea who this energetic newcomer is. She is known among the ranks as the mercenary group's primary problem child, a reputation that seems to precede her as she looms over the small disciple. Without waiting for an explanation, she seizes him by the collar and begins dragging him toward the academy gates. He stammers out questions about their destination and why he's being taken, but she simply laughs it off, mentioning a subjugation mission and insisting that they're going together whether he likes it or not. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit stone corridor far from the training grounds, 2 men discuss their grim duties. The younger one complains about the workload, suggesting his companion help with the slaves, but the older man dismisses the idea, noting that tending to the captives is a job for those with nothing better to do. Their conversation is punctuated by a low, menacing growl from a nearby iron-barred cage, where a massive, shadowy beast glares out with glowing eyes. The older man gestures toward the snarling creature, asking his companion if he's prepared to take over the responsibility of managing such a dangerous captive. The energetic mercenary leads the group into the heart of the royal capital's slums, her voice booming with excitement about the prospect of rounding up criminals. She explains that this desolate district was ravaged by war 6 years ago and subsequently forsaken by the nobility, leaving it a crumbling shell of its former self. Turning to the young boy, she insists he address her as Big Sister Charles rather than Runt, proudly identifying herself as a member of the Blood Sea Mercenary Brigade. He quickly agrees to the new title, though the elven master standing behind him watches the exchange with a look of quiet skepticism. She listens as the boy beams with pride, loudly proclaiming that she's indeed his esteemed Master Silk. The boy watches as she dismisses the topic for the moment, suggesting they begin their search and prompting him to wonder exactly what they are looking for. She reveals that their target is a human trafficking ring, a lead mentioned by her commander that sends a jolt of alarm through the young disciple. To her, criminal hunting is a thrilling hobby that combines justice with profit, a sentiment that leaves the boy questioning her moral compass. Moments later, she corners a local man in a narrow alley, leaning in with a predatory grin to demand information about the kidnappers. Despite her intimidating presence, the man frantically pleads his ignorance, leading her to shrug off the failure while the boy watches her erratic methods with growing concern. She listens as the boy expresses his discomfort with her harsh interrogation methods, his face clouded with pity for the residents of the slums who have been left behind by society. He argues that the people here are forced into crime just to survive in the ruins, but she remains firm, stating that criminals deserve no mercy regardless of their circumstances. The weight of his words seems to linger in the air as she gazes out at the dilapidated buildings, while he quietly admits to understanding the harsh reality of their situation all too well. Suddenly, she decides to abandon her current approach in favor of something more direct, slamming her hands down to trigger a massive upheaval of the earth. The ground surges upward, carrying them both high above the rooftops on a jagged pillar of stone. Standing atop her creation, she proudly declares her prowess as a world-class earth mage, while the boy wonders how this vantage point will help them locate their hidden quarry in the sprawling maze below. Without a moment's hesitation, she leaps from the precipice, calling out for him to follow as they plummet back toward the narrow streets. Once they land, she explains that the spectacle was a calculated move to draw out their enemies, as she scans the shadows for the telltale sign of a hostile gaze directed at them. Her predatory instincts flare as she catches sight of a suspicious figure in the distance, a wild grin spreading across her face. He can only watch in alarm as she bolts forward, her focus entirely locked on the target she has finally flushed out. She had vanished from his sight, leaving the young boy to scan the area in confusion. He wondered aloud if his target had simply disappeared into thin air, unable to track her sudden movement. Looking up at the distant rooftops, he realized with a start that they had moved across the skyline in a mere instant, far faster than he could have anticipated. The speed was unnatural, leaving only a trail of smoke in the distance. After a frantic pursuit, he finally arrived at a large, multi-story building, his breath coming in heavy, ragged gasps. He stood before the imposing structure, certain that this was the kidnapper's hideout, the very heart of the danger he had been chasing. The heavy wooden door groaned on its hinges as it swung open, revealing a dark, cavernous interior. He hesitated for a moment, questioning if the place was truly an abandoned house or if a deadly trap awaited him just beyond the threshold. Stepping tentatively across the threshold, he offered a quiet apology for the intrusion, his voice barely a whisper in the stillness. His senses were on high alert as a faint rustle echoed from the shadows ahead, signaling he was not alone. An oppressive atmosphere settled over him, far more unsettling than the simple absence of light. He felt a deep sense of dread, a creeping wrongness that permeated the very air of the room, making his skin crawl with an instinctive warning of malice. A sudden crash from the second floor drew his gaze upward, making him wonder if Charles Noah had already engaged the enemy. Below, in the dim light of the ground floor, he caught sight of a figure being harshly interrogated, their captor demanding they speak quickly as the tension in the hideout reached a breaking point. Charles Noah firmly grips the scruffy man's collar, her expression one of triumphant satisfaction as she announces their arrival to her young companion. The captive can only scowl in silent resentment, his escape cut short by her decisive action. She dismisses the boy's hesitation regarding her aggressive interrogation tactics, insisting that such measures are justified against their current company. Her focus remains fixed on extracting the location of the other captives, regardless of the man's protests. The boy pauses, his expression clouding as he describes a sickening sensation emanating from the back of the ground floor. It is a presence so foul and out of place that it makes his stomach churn with physical revulsion, a dark aura that doesn't belong in this building. Taking his intuition seriously, she slams her palms against the floorboards, invoking the power of earth manipulation. The wood and stone groan under the sudden surge of magical energy as she searches for hidden structures. The mercenary grins as the structural shift reveals exactly what she suspected, the hollow echo of a hidden passage leading deep underground. Her instincts, combined with the boy's sensitivity, have led them to the truth. He watches in awe as she further demonstrates her mastery, conjuring earth chains that coil tightly around their prisoner, rendering him completely immobile. With the threat neutralized, she signals that it is time to descend into the darkness. The group soon discovers a set of heavy double doors tucked away in a corner, previously obscured by crates and barrels. A faint, shimmering barrier spell hums across the wood, guarding whatever secrets lie beyond. She stares at the entrance, her curiosity piqued by the extreme measures taken to conceal this area. Beside her, the boy and their bound captive share a moment of tense anticipation as they prepare to breach the threshold. Standing before the threshold of the basement, the young disciple suggests they proceed without further delay. The air is thick with the weight of the unknown, but their path is now clear. He reaches out and slowly pushes the door open, the hinges letting out a long, low creak that echoes into the darkness. His heart hammers against his ribs as he wonders if they will find the missing people within. He hesitates at the threshold, his hand hovering near the door as he calls out to his companion. Charles Noah, however, has little patience for his caution, urging him to open it quickly and see what lies beyond. As the heavy doors swing wide, the gruesome reality of the basement is laid bare, a heap of lifeless bodies piled haphazardly in the center of the room. Amidst the carnage, the scruffy man they had been pursuing cowers, his face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated terror as he looks upon the mountain of the dead. Horrified by the sight, the young boy demands an explanation, his voice trembling as he asks what could have possibly happened here. The man can only stammer in response, his mind clearly broken by the horrors he has witnessed, unable to provide a coherent answer to the carnage surrounding them. While the boy reels from the sight, Charles Noah remains cold and analytical, observing that this place was clearly being used as a base of operations. She notes with grim detachment that the pile of corpses is the direct result of the man's own choices, even as a massive, shadowy beast looms ominously in the background. Suddenly, a new threat emerges from the gloom, a massive tusked creature with a thick, dark hide and glowing eyes. It lets out a low, guttural growl, its powerful frame tensed and ready to strike at the intruders who have disturbed its lair. Identifying the creature immediately, Charles Noah explains that it is a C-rank dead boar, a beast notorious for its ability to trample a grown man to death in a single, violent charge. Her tone is devoid of fear, treating the lethal monster as little more than a tactical observation. She continues her lecture, surmising that the group had been attempting to keep and perhaps even sell these monsters, a foolish endeavor that likely led to the massacre in the room. She glances at the trembling man, remarking that if they couldn't manage the beasts, they deserved their fate, before boastfully claiming she could end the creature's life in a mere 5 seconds. Turning her sharp gaze toward the boy, she issues a sudden and chilling command. He is the one who must kill the beast. The weight of her expectation hangs heavy in the air, leaving no room for argument or retreat. The boy is struck with disbelief, his eyes widening as he stammers out a plea, questioning if she truly expects him to face such a monster alone. Charles Noah's expression remains hardened as she counters his fear, stating plainly that she was already slaying creatures of this caliber when she was only 5 years old. Standing tall with an air of absolute authority, she declares that their mercenary band is the strongest in the world, and there is no place for the weak within their ranks. If he truly wishes to prove his worth and become one of them, he must step forward and slay the beast that stands before him. She offers a cheerful, almost mocking encouragement before vanishing, leaving the boy standing in stunned silence as the reality of her departure sets in. He stands frozen, cold sweat beading on his forehead as the weight of the situation sinks in. He is truly alone in this dark place. Suddenly, a heavy thud echoes through the chamber as the only exit is sealed shut, trapping him inside with the beast. The boy stares at the massive dead boar, his mind racing with fear. Without his mentor's protection, he realizes he has no idea when the creature might decide to strike. Stealing his resolve, he clenches his fist and drops to the ground, calling forth his companions with a desperate cry for a dual summoning of Imu and Kaburo. In a burst of light, the small slime and the spear-wielding goblin manifest, ready to stand by their master's side against the looming threat. He quickly briefs the goblin on their dire circumstances, explaining that they cannot leave this room unless they manage to take down the monster before them. Looking back at the hulking monster, the boy acknowledges that a conventional frontal assault would be suicide, as they lack the raw power to win a fair fight. He turns to his summons, checking if the slime is prepared for the plan he has devised and ensuring the goblin is ready to execute his part of the strategy. With his team assembled and a plan in motion, the young summoner leads the charge, his voice ringing out with a newfound determination to survive and win. Charles Noah turns away from the bound captive, deciding to leave the interrogation to the young boy while she conducts a search of the area. The prisoner remains deeply skeptical, questioning if she truly believes a mere child can defeat the beast lurking within. He continues his warning, bound tightly and glaring with desperation, insisting that victory is impossible regardless of who the boy is. Charles Noah merely glances back, her expression unreadable as she trusts in her disciple's capabilities. Elsewhere, the veteran mercenary Begonia weighs in on the situation, noting that C-rank monsters are typically challenges reserved for season knights. He asks pointedly if they intend to simply stand by and watch the boy be slaughtered by such a formidable foe. Suddenly, the chaos of battle erupts as the massive boar lunges forward. The boy leaps through the air, shouting a desperate command for his goblin companion to evade the crushing weight of the beast's charge. He crouches beside his ally after the narrow escape, checking for injuries and asking if the creature's speed is too much to handle. The goblin, though winded, signals his readiness to continue the fight. They stand dwarfed by the shadow of the towering monster as it prepares for another strike. Realizing the creature is faster than anticipated, the boy decides they must pivot to the contingency plan they had discussed. He steels himself, his face slick with sweat as he recalls the training and the bond they have built. This is the moment where their coordinated effort must prove its worth against the overwhelming odds. In his memory, he had once gathered his summoned companions to discuss a specific strategy for when they found themselves alone in combat. The goblin had listened with a tilted head, trying to grasp the complex concept of a tactical plan. He had explained with a gentle smile that by combining their unique strengths, the three of them would become far more powerful than any of them could ever be individually. It was a promise of mutual support and shared growth. Returning to the heat of the struggle, he looks at his friends with renewed resolve. Though he apologizes for his own perceived weakness, he declares with certainty that together, they're stronger than they have ever been before. He rallies his small team, his eyes burning with a newfound resolve as he declares their intent to emerge victorious. Beside him, the small goblin nods in grim agreement, acknowledging that they must maintain their coordinated effort for as long as the boy's magical physical enhancement remains active. The strategy is simple yet demanding. One of them must act as a constant distraction, drawing the massive beast's ire while the others wait for the perfect opening. Putting the plan into motion, he leaps through the air, narrowly avoiding the boar's tusks as it thunders past. The beast's momentum carries it forward, but the boy is already repositioning, his movements fluid and desperate. Seeing an opportunity to further disorient the creature, the goblin steps forward with a taunting cry, waving his spear to ensure the monster's attention remains divided between its two agile prey. He knows that even a creature of this size has limits. Once the boar's movements begin to falter from exhaustion, they will launch their decisive counterattack. Standing his ground in the center of the stone corridor, he shouts a challenge at the beast, beckoning it to charge once more. The monster's eye widens, reflecting a primal, singular rage as it locks onto its target. With a deafening roar and a cloud of pulverized stone, the boar lunges forward, a living battering ram of muscle and fur. At the critical moment, he signals the final stage of the trap, calling out for the small slime to spring into action as the beast closes the distance. He watches as the slime, Imu, leaps onto the massive beast's face, effectively blinding it. The creature thrashes wildly, its vision obscured by the gelatinous mass, while the goblin, Kaburo, prepares to strike. Seizing the opening, he and Kaburo lunge forward in a coordinated assault. Their weapons find their marks as they drive their blades into the disoriented monster, capitalizing on the distraction provided by their small companion. The massive boar finally collapses with a heavy thud, sending a cloud of dust into the air. He drops to one knee, gasping for breath, his mind racing through the strategy they just executed, blinding the target with Imu to create an opening for a dual-pronged attack on its vitals. His chest heaves as he tries to steady his breathing, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. It was a narrow victory, but a sense of disbelief washes over him as he realizes that they, just a boy and his summons, actually managed to bring down a formidable dead boar. Looking down at the trembling slime on the floor, he offers a soft word of acknowledgement. The realization that they have won begins to settle in, the silence of the corridor replacing the chaotic sounds of battle. However, the victory is short-lived as a cold dread grips his heart. Behind him, the supposedly defeated beast begins to rise, its body wreathed in a sinister, dark aura that pulses with renewed malice. Before he can even turn, a sharp, desperate cry rings out from the shadows. Charles Noah screams for him to move, her face contorted in panic as the monster prepares to strike again. The massive boar lunges, but a sudden, violent eruption of magic catches it head-on. The boy stares in disbelief, his heart hammering against his ribs as the smoke clears to reveal the beast still standing, though visibly shaken by the impact. He watches the creature growl, noting that while his magic bullet had an effect, it wasn't the decisive blow he needed. He realizes that his current level of mana, still unrefined and raw, isn't enough to simply blast a monster of this rank away with a single shot. Looking down at his trembling hand, he wonders if he can even land another hit. His control is still shaky, and the thought of the beast closing the distance before he can fire again sends a chill down his spine, making him question his own capabilities in this life-or-death moment. He stands frozen in the middle of the path, his mind racing with doubts about whether he has enough mana for multiple shots. The fear of failure looms large, a heavy weight that threatens to anchor him to the spot as the monster prepares for another charge, its eyes fixed on its prey. His grip tightens on his focus as he spirals into a series of terrifying possibilities. He agonizes over what would happen if he missed, or if the boar simply ignored the pain and trampled him, or if his magic failed to release in time to stop the inevitable collision. Glancing over at his companion, he sees the goblin, Kaburo, panting heavily and clearly reaching the end of his strength. It becomes painfully clear that they cannot repeat their previous tactic. The goblin's stamina is spent, and they're out of time and out of options. In the suffocating silence of his own mind, a single, primal command echoes with absolute clarity. He must not die. Suddenly, a terrifying, dark aura begins to swirl around him, a vortex of raw power that he didn't know he possessed. He gasps, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and pure terror as the energy coalesces into a sphere of pure destruction in his hands, far exceeding anything he has ever summoned before. With a desperate, guttural scream, he unleashes the torrent of dark energy. Massive, shadowy projectiles tear through the air, impacting the ground with enough force to shatter the very earth and send plumes of debris skyward, engulfing the area in a chaotic display of power. As the chaotic power continues to erupt, Kaburo grabs the small slime and dives for cover, shouting in alarm. The boy can only watch in horror as the magic he summons spirals completely out of his control, a wild storm of shadow that refuses to stop. He is consumed by a terrifying, dark radiance, his eyes wide with a power he cannot comprehend. Begonia watches from the sidelines, his face pale as he realizes this destructive force is coming from the boy, yet it is clear the power has completely run wild. The boy screams for the energy to stop, but it only surges further, erupting in a violent shockwave that tears through the air around him. Desperate and overwhelmed, he cries out for anyone to help him as the shadows threaten to swallow him whole. Suddenly, a calm presence reaches out. Charles Noah appears behind him, her hands steady on his shoulders as she reassures him that everything will be all right, urging him to take a deep breath. She guides him through the rhythm of his breathing, and slowly, the suffocating dark aura begins to recede until it vanishes entirely, leaving him gasping for air. Looking up with tear-filled eyes, he sees her smiling down at him, her voice light as she remarks on how he managed to take down the beast before she could even step in. However, her expression soon turns grave as she warns him that his body is not yet capable of wielding such a force. She tells him plainly that using it again would be fatal and forbids him from touching that power until he has grown much stronger. Nearby, Begonia calls out to their goblin companion, Kaburo, who stands amidst the wreckage of the battle. The group begins to gather their bearings, with Begonia checking on the boy's well-being while he, still shaken, immediately asks about the safety of his small slime friend. They find the creature has undergone a strange transformation, its gelatinous body swelling to an immense size as it looms over the remains of the conflict. It lunges toward the remains of the beast, prompting a sharp rebuke from the mercenary. She warns that such a mess cannot be left behind to rot and spread disease, especially since the damage is too severe to return anything to the families, making disposal the only logical choice. It finishes the grisly task in moments, leaving the floor bare and the area cleared of the carcass. She notes with a smirk that this certainly makes scavenging for valuables much more efficient, even if the method is unorthodox and unsettling to the young boy watching. He watches her with growing skepticism, wondering if this entire ordeal was just a ploy to make her own job easier. She senses his doubt and immediately shuts down his grumbling, telling him to stop overthinking and get back to work. The sound of heavy, rhythmic footsteps suddenly vibrates through the stone floor, signaling an approaching presence. A sense of dread fills the air as someone warns that the vice commander is nearby and will be livid if he sees the current state of the group. The boy slumps forward, his strength completely spent. He hits the ground with a dull thud, his breathing ragged as the toll of the day's events finally crushes his spirit. At that moment, Silk rounds the corner with the great wolf Lil at her side. Her eyes widen as she takes in the sight of the boy on the floor, her gaze quickly turning icy as it lands on the woman responsible for his condition. She steps forward, her voice dripping with venom as she demands to know what has been done to her disciple. She doesn't hold back, hurling a sharp insult at the mercenary's physical appearance to express her fury. The mercenary tries to play it cool, looking away and insisting she hasn't done anything out of the ordinary. However, the boy's ragged appearance tells a different story, and the summoner isn't buying the lie for a second. The two women square off, the air thick with mutual loathing. As they trade barbs and prepare for an inevitable clash, the exhausted boy can only watch from the floor, caught in the middle of their escalating feud. The elven summoner walked with a stiff gait, her patience wearing thin as her companion continued her relentless teasing. Charles Noah, never one for subtlety, mocked her small stature and called her a milk girl, but the master of beasts kept her focus inward, her thoughts lingering on the power of her white wolf. Suddenly, she decided to end the chatter with a display of force, commanding the very ground to rise. With a sharp cry of earth manipulation, the terrain buckled and surged forward in a violent charge. Not to be outdone, the wild-haired mercenary dove into the fray with a manic grin, her weapon shattering the rising stone into 1,000 jagged shards. Seeing the devastation unfolding, the young boy and the younger mercenary scrambled for cover, desperate to avoid being swept up in the chaotic wake of the two powerful women. As the dust began to settle, the two rivals stood amidst the wreckage, Charles Noah puffing out her chest and declaring her superiority in the heat of combat. To prove her point, she unleashed a devastating technique, Earth's Wrath, causing massive pillars of stone to erupt from the earth with bone-shaking force. Despite the display of raw power, the summoner remained unmoved, her gaze cold as she insisted that she had not lost a single contest to the boisterous mercenary. A heavy silence fell between them as their eyes drifted to a physical difference that words could not bridge, a stark contrast in their forms that spoke louder than any boast. The sheer scale of their rivalry manifested in a massive plume of smoke and debris that rose high above the rooftops of a nearby settlement. Finally, the mercenary reached out to poke the summoner's cheek, a mischievous glint in her eye as she vowed to one day break the girl's stoic resolve and make her weep. The aftermath of the magical duel is a scene of utter chaos, with the town square's cobblestones shattered and buildings scarred by the intensity of the clash. She stands amidst the rubble, her mischievous energy dampened as the young boy scolds them, pointing out that while they are free to fight, causing such widespread trouble for others is unacceptable. He watches the exchange with a sharp, analytical gaze, confirming that the boy was indeed with the person they are looking for. Because of this, she quickly shifts the conversation, thanking the mercenary for his help, but insisting there are still many things she needs to ask the captive. As the group gathers, the mercenary questions the identity of the man they've apprehended, while the young boy remains quiet, his mind clearly elsewhere. In response, she produces a crumpled piece of paper she found earlier, catching the mercenary's attention as he realizes its potential significance. The mention of Duke Bosco on the document triggers a sudden realization for the boy, recalling the arrogant nobleman and the trouble he represents. While they walk through the town, the conversation turns to the disturbing trend among the nobility of forcing monsters to fight for entertainment, a practice that leaves the boy deeply unsettled. She continues to read from the list, reciting names like Sasha, Beliar, Lawrence, and Alphenart, wondering where these individuals might have been taken. Finally, her gaze sharpens as she finds one more name on the list, whispering the name Rain with a look of intense focus. She examines the document, her eyes narrowing as she processes the name Tempest family written upon it. Beside her, the young disciple watches in silence, sensing the weight of the discovery. Silk weighs in on the potential culprits, suggesting that such clandestine operations usually point toward the Empire or the Holy Dragon Kingdom. Charles Noah turns her attention back to the bound captive, warning him to speak now before his body is forced to reveal its secrets later. The man, paralyzed with fear, shrieks that even torture is useless because the person he serves is a true demon. She remains skeptical, but the man's desperation reaches a fever pitch as he insists that it is not a matter of choice. He simply cannot speak the truth even if he wanted to. His eyes suddenly overflow with a dark, viscous fluid that looks more like ink than tears. He pleads for understanding, gasping that the moment he betrays his master, he will be killed, terrified that his boss will consume him whole. The boy recoils as a sickening, wet sound erupts from the man's throat, his body beginning to buckle under an unseen, violent force. The group watches in stunned horror as the captive is silenced forever by a gruesome internal rupture, his secrets dying with him in a spray of darkness. Charles Noah stares at the massive, fallen beast, her hand resting on her head in disbelief. She notes the precision of the strike, wondering if this was truly the work of an enemy force. She continues her analysis, suggesting that the Holy Dragon Kingdom is likely involved in these dealings. Silk chimes in, explaining that certain magic requires specific incantations to activate, a detail that complicates their understanding of the Empire's involvement. The Elven Mage delves deeper into the history of the region, explaining that the Barbaroi Empire and the Algeria Holy Dragon Kingdom were at war only 6 years ago. The tension between the two nations remains a palpable force in their current predicament. Her gaze sharpens as she describes the Holy Dragon Kingdom as a fanatical religious state. They worship the divine dragon with a fervor that leads them to label all non-humans as mere monsters, a philosophy she clearly finds abhorrent. Will looks up at her, his expression filled with concern as he asks if they should report such a significant discovery to the authorities. Charles Noah, however, is quick to dismiss the idea, insisting they collect all the evidence themselves first to avoid unnecessary complications. She places a reassuring hand near him, boasting that the Iron Beast mercenaries are the strongest force around. In her eyes, they have no need for the slow-moving knights when they can handle the situation far more effectively on their own. Later, back at the mercenary headquarters, the atmosphere is thick with tension as the advisor berates Begonia for his recent actions. From the doorway, the young companions watch the stern lecture unfold, realizing that even the most skilled warriors must answer for their choices. He stands there, enduring the verbal lashing while the massive commander looms in the background, his silent presence adding to the weight of the moment. Will shrinks back, feeling the immense pressure of the authority figures in the room. The commander eventually turns his attention to the boy, acknowledging the rumors that he took down a dead boar single-handedly. Will, ever humble, quickly clarifies that it wasn't his strength alone that won the day. He reflects on the narrow margin of his survival, knowing that if Charles Noah hadn't arrived when she did, the outcome would have been far grimmer. The weight of his own limitations settles heavily upon him as he considers the dangers they still face. He reflects on his recent failures, admitting that his blade was useless against the massive beast and his uncontrolled magic nearly endangered his companions. Seeing the boy's dejection, the massive commander rests a heavy hand on his head, countering his self-pity by explaining that recognizing one's own weakness is the first step toward true strength. The mercenary with the spiked hair chimes in, noting that while raw power is important, every member of their group is flawed or lacking in some human capacity. Meanwhile, in the quiet of the administrative office, the man in glasses adjusts his spectacles, acknowledging that the organization only functions because there are those dedicated to filling the gaps left by others. He sighs over a mountain of paperwork, lamenting the constant need to repair taverns and fix schedules disrupted by the commander's impulsive whims. Back with the group, the mercenary offers a wry, knowing smile as he considers the vice commander's perpetual state of exasperation. The commander continues to praise the young disciple, expressing his pride in how much the boy has grown and the depth of his reflection. Watching from the shadows of the doorway, the elven summoner stands frozen, her mind reeling as she witnesses the unexpected bond forming between her student and a formidable leader. When she inquires about her energetic companion, she learns that the woman is currently enduring a grueling lecture as punishment for her recklessness and for neglecting her administrative duties. The trio stands in silent solidarity, the commander noting that the disciplinary session will likely drag on for another hour, leaving the young boy trembling at the sheer intensity of the group's internal dynamics. The advisor adjusts his glasses with a cold, clinical precision, his gaze fixed on the boy. He asks with a dry tone if the child is simply waiting his turn for a stern lecture, the weight of administrative discipline hanging heavy in the air. He is suddenly hoisted into the air as Begonia hauls him away from the impending scolding, the mercenary's boisterous energy a sharp contrast to the advisor's stillness. The boy flails, his face a mask of pure, wide-eyed panic as he is dragged toward the exit. Once they are a safe distance away, the mercenary wipes sweat from his brow, admitting that the tension had even him on edge. Beside them, the elven summoner sighs, her posture slumped as she complains about the exhausting formality of having to sit perfectly still for so long. Suddenly, a realization strikes the mercenary, and he turns to the boy, remembering that the lad had something important to discuss with the summoner. She looks up, her curiosity piqued, while the boy prepares to voice the question that has been weighing on his mind. Nearby, the small goblin and the gelatinous slime sit in a state of total collapse, their bodies slumped against the wall in a display of utter exhaustion. The summoner notes that they have remained in this catatonic state ever since their return from the recent skirmish. She quickly reassures the boy, explaining that there is no need for alarm because this lethargy is actually a promising sign of impending evolution. He repeats the word, his eyes widening as he tries to grasp the concept of his companions transforming into something more. The summoner continues her explanation, detailing how the growth and evolution of monsters allows them to transcend their current limits and become higher-order beings. The boy listens intently, the gears of his mind turning as he considers the potential of the creatures by his side. He looks back at the weary pair, a new sense of respect blooming as he realizes that even the smallest among them are pushing themselves to become stronger. The sight of their quiet struggle resonates deeply within him. Inspired by their dedication, he clenches his fist, a fire of determination igniting in his eyes. He vows to himself that he must train harder and grow more powerful, refusing to be left behind by his companions. Elsewhere, the heavy doors of the command hall swing open as a messenger rushes in to deliver a grim report to the seated commander. He reveals that the 3rd Squad's base has been completely decimated, prompting the leader to demand the identity of the one responsible for such destruction. He grips his glass tightly as the messenger identifies the culprit as a fierce beast. The subordinate's eye is wide with terror, a bead of sweat rolling down his face as he delivers the grim news of the squad's destruction. While the commander's hall is gripped by this revelation, a masked figure sits in shadow elsewhere, swirling a drink in a quiet, ornate chamber. With a low, satisfied murmur, the individual notes that the pieces have finally begun to move, their true intentions hidden behind the cold, bleached visage of a horned skull. He was once a man who ruled the shadows of the slums, a charismatic leader named Ruark who commanded the loyalty of the desperate. His life was a cycle of calculated malice until a chance encounter with a certain individual shattered his world and set him on a new path. While Ruark reflected on his past, the atmosphere in the command room was far more clinical as the advisor delivered a grim report. He warned the commander that the phantom beasts had begun to move, suggesting that it would be wise to withdraw their hands before things became uncontrollable. The advisor's cautious words were interrupted by the masked figure, who reached out with a gloved hand as if grasping at an unseen thread of fate. He mused aloud that he hadn't been mistaken about the potential he sensed, his voice echoing with a chilling certainty. He remained a silent, imposing presence as Ruark threw himself into a deep, submissive bow before the commander. Ruark pleaded for understanding, insisting that he was not an enemy and was willing to do anything to protect his boss's interests, even if it meant standing against the tide. The commander looked down at the groveling man, his expression unreadable behind his sharp features. He declared that gathering followers was merely a means to an end, revealing that his true objective from the very beginning was the total annihilation of the Phantom Beast mercenary group. Far from the cold calculations of the war room, the kitchen hummed with the warmth of the hearth as Warduck spoke with the young disciple. He noted that things had been exceptionally hectic lately, while the boy admitted he had been swept up in Charles relentless pace. He kneaded the heavy dough with mechanical precision, but his mind was clearly elsewhere. The boy confessed his growing anxiety, explaining that ever since that day, Emu and the others had been strangely lethargic, leaving him worried for their well-being. The chef listened patiently before offering a reassuring smile, explaining that this lethargy was actually a positive sign. He revealed that the master had identified it as a precursor to evolution, a necessary period of rest before the creatures reached a new level of power. He then gestured toward a plate of freshly baked bread, encouraging the boy to take it to his companions. He could see the lingering worry in the child's eyes and urged him to go and see for himself that they were simply resting. The chef watched with a chuckle as the boy shouted a quick thanks and sprinted out of the kitchen with the plate in hand. He moved with renewed energy, eager to reach the barracks and check on the friends who had become his second family. He stands by the door, wondering if the others will eat, while Charlenoa's voice rings out in a stubborn refusal to let go. She suddenly lunges at him, wrapping him in a tight, suffocating hug and declaring him her personal prize. The advisor watches the chaotic display with a look of pure exhaustion, trying to maintain some semblance of order. Because of her outburst, the advisor tries to reason with her, insisting that they must coordinate their efforts with the kingdom's knights for the upcoming task. She snaps back, dismissing the knights as incompetent and vowing to handle the matter on her own terms. The argument ends with her stomping away in a huff, hurling insults at the vice commander's intelligence as she disappears down the hall. The advisor is left standing in the corridor, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Moments later, she leans in close to the boy, a mischievous glint in her eyes as she whispers her plan to act independently and in secret. He can only stare back, his expression a mix of concern and disbelief at her reckless confidence. Their private conversation is interrupted by the arrival of the master, who bluntly labels the girl's behavior as foolish. While the two women bicker, the master acknowledges the grim reality that the kingdom's knights are indeed unreliable in this situation. As the tension simmers, the master shifts the focus to the true mystery, the identity of the individual leading the human traffickers. She voices her suspicion that the Holy Kingdom might be covertly influencing events from shadows. Walking together, the boy recalls the strange self-destruction of the dead boar, a detail that still unnerves him. The master adds to the list of concerns, reminding them of the girl's previous capture and the overall danger they face. They eventually gather in a quiet room, the weight of these mounting mysteries pressing down on them. The boy realizes that the path ahead is far more complicated than he initially imagined. Despite the gravity of the situation, the energetic girl strikes a pose and declares that they will proceed with this stealthy operation. Behind her, the master and the boy share a silent, skeptical look, knowing that stealth is a concept entirely foreign to her nature. She continues her energetic outburst, insisting that they cannot afford to sit idly by while the Holy Kingdom remains a threat. Silk, however, remains unimpressed, suggesting that the vice commander is far better suited for the delicate task of persuasion than someone as impulsive as her companion. Undeterred, the young mercenary puffs out her chest with pride, boasting that her group, the Fierce Beast Mercenaries, was responsible for annihilating the Holy Kingdom's invasion force 6 years ago. She speaks with a confidence that suggests she was at the heart of the glory. Despite her grand claims, the reality is that she is only 16 years old and hadn't even joined the mercenary band at the time of that legendary victory. Her bravado seems to outpace her actual history with the unit. Turning her attention toward the young boy, she declares her intent to personally train him, preparing him for the inevitable day when his strength will be required. The boy, however, looks on with a mixture of apprehension and uncertainty, clearly overwhelmed by her intensity. This declaration immediately draws a sharp rebuke from the elven summoner, who firmly reminds her that the boy is her disciple and she will not permit anyone to handle him as they please. The mercenary simply smiles back, dismissively stating that she has already made up her mind to take him under her wing. As the air between the two women crackles with rising hostility, the mercenary leans in with a predatory grin, challenging the summoner to a confrontation whenever she feels ready. Caught in the middle of their clashing wills, the boy can only sweat nervously, sensing the imminent danger of the situation. Seizing a moment of distraction, he beats a hasty retreat, clutching a plate of food as he flees the brewing storm. He mutters to himself about the peril of getting caught in their crossfire, focused now on delivering the meal Warda prepared to Emu and the others before it loses its warmth. Will is suddenly tackled by a young girl he doesn't recognize, who clings to him and calls him master, leaving both him and Charlenoa in a state of total confusion. He stares in disbelief as the goblin Kaburo, now transformed into a tall, formidable warrior, bows deeply and expresses his gratitude for the meal that sparked his change. They gather to discuss the startling evolution, concluding that the high-quality meat they shared acted as a powerful catalyst for their companion's growth. She, the slime Emu, has taken on a human-like form, explaining with a cheerful peace sign that she can now mimic the appearance of things she eats, though she remains a slime at heart. He, the warrior goblin, turns his gaze toward the dark basement, reflecting on the dead boar and the tragedy that occurred there, feeling a pang of sympathy for the boy caught in the crossfire. She, Charlenoa, tries to comfort the boy as he looks down in sadness, suggesting that Emu's new form is a way for the feelings of the lost child to live on. She further observes that the slime's chosen features, the pale hair and the striking red eyes, are an exact match for the boy's own appearance. He asks if this resemblance was intentional, wondering if the slime purposefully chose to look like her master out of affection. She confirms this with a bright, happy smile, explaining that while she can change her colors, she prefers these because they are the same as his. He, now dressed in sturdy new gear, leads his evolved companions forward, desperate to find his mentor and show her their progress. He peeks around the corner with his two companions, spotting the vice commander standing alone in the corridor. As he watches, the man appears deeply troubled, his brow furrowed as he stares intently at the documents in his hands. Approaching him, the boy calls out, catching the administrator's attention. The man looks up, surprised to see the young disciple with two unfamiliar faces. With a proud smile, the youth introduces his evolved summons, Imu and Kaburo, who stand ready by his side. While the official takes a moment to process this, the boy admits he isn't quite ready to present this new development to his master, Silk, just yet. Noticing the exhaustion etched on the man's face, the child asks what is wrong, prompting a confession about the investigation into the Royal Knights and the recent kidnappings. In response, he explains that the kingdom's leadership has issued a direct order to cease their involvement, leaving the mercenaries in a difficult position. The shadow of Duke Bosco looms over the conversation as the advisor describes the immense political pressure being exerted by the nobility. His grip tightens on the report, crushing the paper as he curses the loss of competent leaders in the war 6 years prior, leaving only self-serving cowards in power. Through his spectacles, his gaze sharpens with a mix of duty and despair, realizing that their mission to protect the people is being strangled by the very kingdom they serve. He listens as the boy points out the absurdity of the situation, noting that the current state of affairs is completely backwards. In response, the strategist adjusts his glasses, declaring that if the mercenaries truly exist to protect the people, they must fulfill that duty even if it requires defying established rules and orders. The young disciple offers a small, knowing smile, agreeing that this is exactly how things ought to be. A shadow falls over his face as his resolve hardens into something much sharper. He vows to drag every hidden evil into the light of day, warning his unseen enemies to prepare themselves. Seeing the intensity of his conviction, the boy turns to his companions with a look of concern, suggesting that the vice commander might need some rest after such a heavy declaration. He reflects on the nature of the group, reasoning that since the mercenaries are the strongest, their leader must surely be a benevolent figure, though a fleeting memory of the commander's terrifying, demonic aura gives him pause. Later that night, the quiet of the infirmary is broken by a soft inquiry, asking if the boy is feeling unwell or if something is weighing on his mind. Outside, the city remains oblivious to the shifting tides, though whispers have begun to circulate through the streets regarding the kingdom's most powerful mercenary band and the mysterious new apprentice who recently joined their ranks. Amidst the shadows, a man with burning eyes watches and waits, concluding that the time for patience has ended. He declares his intent to act, guided by the will of the divine dragon. Beside him stands a formidable dragonkin warrior, his gaze fixed on a distant goal as he whispers a name, Lieutenant, and swears a solemn oath to utterly dismantle the mercenaries who stand in their way. The advisor stands before the commander, his expression grave as he suggests they handle the cleanup of the recent mess themselves to avoid further complications. He vows to see their enemies destroyed, his eyes narrowing behind his spectacles with cold intent. Below, Charles Noah eagerly volunteers for the task. While the commander reflects on the weight of the responsibility he has placed on his subordinate's shoulders. While they discuss strategy, Warduck and Young will enjoy a meal, oblivious to the tension until the advisor sharply asks about the whereabouts of the others, noting that Silk is out for sweets and Begonia is likely at the casino. The commander's face darkens as the advisor explains that the knights won't move. Instead, they've been pressured to back off because the names of high-ranking officials and nobles were found at the slave trade destination. He continues, his gaze cold and analytical, noting that the kingdom's leadership is almost certainly pulling the strings from the shadows, protecting their own interests. Hearing this, Charles Noah suggests a simple solution. Raid Duke Basco's estate and force a confession from everyone involved, though Warduck insists they need a properly constructed plan before acting. The commander agrees with the sentiment, but warns that while they can handle the cleanup, they must avoid creating a mess that causes even more trouble for the organization later. He then turns the floor back to the advisor, who confidently requests to lead the operation, promising a flawless strategy to annihilate their foes and settle the score. The trio of warriors, the chef, the commander, and the problem child, stand united in their resolve, their faces set with grim determination to see the plan through. Elsewhere, far from the war room, will assist Ruark with the daily chores, hanging laundry as Emu and the others go about their business. A brief moment of domestic peace amidst the brewing storm. He beams with a bright, innocent smile, his eyes sparkling with a sense of accomplishment as he reflects on the recent events. He wonders aloud how everyone else is faring, his youthful energy undiminished by the weight of the world around him. Beside him, his companions prepare for the next stage of their journey. He watches with admiration as the summoner and her goblin guard move with purpose, relieved to know that their leader is also taking action, which eases his lingering worries. Meanwhile, in the cold stone halls of power, the slum king stands before the arrogant Duke Bosco. He maintains a facade of subservience, reporting that the beast has been dealt with, while the Duke looks on with a mixture of boredom and disdain. The Duke dismisses the lives of commoners as insignificant, his voice dripping with elitism as he praises the wonderful news of the beast's removal. He remains focused on his own status, while the man before him mentions the heavy preparations currently underway. Continuing his haughty demands, the nobleman insists that those who mock him cannot be forgiven and announces plans for a new spectacle involving monsters. In response, the Slum King suggests that if the previous beast is no longer viable, a replacement must be found immediately. The Duke is intrigued by the prospect of a fight between slaves, finding the idea of mutual slaughter entertaining. He reviews the documents presented to him, noting the acquisition of 2 slaves intended for the Holy Kingdom. Once he is out of the Duke's immediate presence, the Slum King's composure cracks, his face contorting with a silent, burning rage. He curses the old man's arrogance under his breath, wishing for his swift demise as he clutches the documents tightly. Suddenly, a shadow looms over him as a masked figure with draconic features emerges from the darkness. The sudden appearance of this mysterious ally or overseer catches him completely off guard, sending a jolt of alarm through his body. He recoils in shock, his eyes wide as the masked dragonkin speaks of the necessity of important trash and the power they hold. The figure warns him that even those he despises serve a purpose in the grander scheme of their operations. The masked warrior looms closer, questioning if the Slum King truly understands the weight of the authority they are dealing with. He stands frozen, forced to listen as the dragonkin reminds him that their goals require patience and the manipulation of the very corruption he hates. He stammers, trying to hide his unease from the imposing dragon warrior. The dragonkin dismisses his concern, noting that he doesn't care if Ruark is hiding something. As they walk, the dragonkin commands him to move forward, stating that preparations are complete and the plan is set. Ruark follows, his voice small as he acknowledges the order. Meanwhile, the focus shifts to the interior of the mercenary base, where the small summon companions are being integrated into the daily chores, their presence bringing a strange new energy to the halls. Will finds the culinary tasks much easier with the extra hands. Kaburo handles the prep work with precision, while Charles keeps a close eye on the stove, noting that Emu's unique physiology makes it impervious to the heat. Seeing her hand drift toward the food, he gently scolds her, reminding her that snacking before the meal is finished is forbidden. She looks slightly dejected, but complies. He then turns his attention to the secret ingredient Warduck taught him, honey. However, as he tips the jar, he realizes with a start that it is completely empty. Despite the sun beginning to set, he decides to run out and buy more. Charles warns him that it's getting dangerous at this hour, but he insists he will be back quickly, driven by the need to perfect the dish. Even Kaburo agrees that the honey is essential, noting that Emu has a sweet tooth as well. Stepping out into the city, the boy navigates the familiar streets toward the market. He notes that the area feels strangely deserted for this time of day, with fewer people than usual lingering in the shadows, even though the sun hasn't fully disappeared. Turning into a narrow alleyway to save time, he feels a prickle of fear. He tells himself there is nothing to be afraid of, and that once he reaches the main thoroughfare, he will be safe. He emerges into a wide, silent street, the tall buildings looming over him like silent sentinels. The emptiness is absolute, leaving him standing alone in the growing twilight, the only sound the soft echo of his own footsteps. He stands alone in the silence, his eyes wide with a growing sense of unease. Looking around the empty street, he whispers to himself that there is absolutely no one around, the realization of his isolation beginning to sink in. Moving deeper into the building, the boy searched for any sign of life, wondering why the establishment felt so unnervingly vacant. His eyes fell upon a table laden with a feast, the steam rising from the dishes suggesting they had been served only moments ago. Reaching out to touch the meal, he was startled to find the texture was like cold, molded clay, a realization that the magic at work here was far more sophisticated than he had imagined. Meanwhile, a silent figure watched him from the shadows of the room. The figure rose, his voice cold as he remarked that it was obvious the boy was a mage himself. He felt a wave of pure hostility radiating from the man, a pressure far more intense than any monster he had ever encountered, leaving him certain that he stood no chance in a direct confrontation. The adversary adjusted his skull-like mask, declaring himself a hunter of fierce beasts, while the boy, trembling, could only ask what fate awaited him. With a single, chilling word, kill, the man began to advance. Desperation took hold as he scanned the room for an exit, his eyes locking onto a nearby window as his only hope for survival. Without a second thought, he threw himself through the glass, the shards shattering as he plummeted toward the safety of the outside world. As he scans the room, his eyes land on the masked figure seated calmly at the far counter, who explains that this entire pocket of reality is under his absolute control through the use of spatial magic. The boy trembles as a heavy hand rests upon his head, prompting him to ask why his life is being sought, only for the hunter to offer a chilling reassurance that his death is not scheduled for this moment. Far from that magical prison, the sun beats down on the sturdy timber and stone of the Mercenary Guild's headquarters, where a different kind of tension is brewing within the city walls. Inside the war room, Begonia stares at the wall in a fit of self-loathing, lamenting his failure to protect the boy, while Charles Noah and Warduck look on with shared grimness. The heavy silence is broken by the vice commander, who adjusts his glasses and firmly instructs the gathered warriors to set aside their rage and focus on the facts of the abduction. They gather around the central table, a collection of the guild's most formidable souls, united by a growing fury toward the unknown assailant who dared to strike at one of their own. Holding a crumpled parchment, the advisor reveals the kidnapper's demand for solo ransom delivery by Nightfall, a timeline so tight that Warduck immediately recognizes it as a blatant trap. Charles Noah's knuckles whiten as she realizes the boy is merely a pawn in a larger game aimed at destabilizing their entire organization, likely orchestrated by the Holy Dragon Kingdom. The commander's expression darkens at the mention of that realm, his voice a low growl as he recalls his bloody history with them, having once killed their god, while Begonia prepares himself for the inevitable confrontation. He continues to weigh the gravity of the situation, acknowledging that facing high-ranking holy knights would be a grueling ordeal for anyone. Even the great white wolf, Lil, seems to sense the mounting tension as the group deliberates their next move. Stepping forward, the advisor admits that he lacks the raw martial prowess of his comrades, his voice steady despite the admission. He knows his role is one of strategy, not the front lines, yet the weight of the decision rests heavily on his shoulders. Nearby, the summoner's expression darkens as she delivers the grim news that the trail has gone cold. Despite her best efforts and the keen senses of her beast, the scent they were following vanished abruptly, leaving them without a path. The seasoned mercenary turns his attention to the other summons, inquiring about the status of the slime and the goblin. His companion shakes her head, confirming that the magical link to their small allies remains severed, a worrying sign of the kidnapper's power. She explains that if even a creature as powerful as Lil cannot track the boy, it implies the use of high-level barrier or spatial magic. The realization that they are dealing with such sophisticated sorcery casts a long shadow over the room. Desperate to act, the energetic warrior suggests a covert tailing mission, but the advisor immediately shuts the idea down. He warns that any discovery of their interference could lead to a fatal outcome for the young captive, a risk they cannot afford to take. The conversation shifts as a name is mentioned, Nyalco, a member of their ranks currently away on a mission. The advisor adjusts his glasses, his mind racing through the possibilities of having such a reliable operative present during this crisis. While the warrior insists that their absent comrade would be back in time to help, the advisor checks the clock with a grimace. Barely an hour remains before the deadline set by the kidnappers, and the window for a rescue is rapidly closing. They stand in a tense silence, the weight of the impending choice pressing down on them. The advisor suggests they use every remaining second to find a solution, though the options are becoming increasingly scarce. Finally, he makes his decision, declaring that he will be the one to deliver the ransom money alone. Despite the warning that he is walking into a certain death trap, he remains firm, believing his life is a small price to pay to ensure the boy's safety. He stands in the distance with Begonia, unaware that a young girl nearby has felt a sudden, strange vibration. Her eyes widen in shock as she hears a faint, spectral call echoing in her mind, signaling a disturbance in the magical ether. This sudden surge of energy is felt even more acutely by the elven summoner, who freezes as a familiar magical bond snaps back into existence. She is visibly shaken, struggling to comprehend how a connection that was supposed to be completely severed by high-level sealing magic could possibly be restored. She begins to tremble as a terrifying possibility crosses her mind, wondering if the young boy has resorted to a forbidden or desperate measure to reach out to them. The mere thought of what he might have done to break through the spatial barrier leaves her breathless with worry. Far away, within the cold stone walls of his prison, the boy stands battered and broken, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. Blood stains his tunic and drips from his chin, yet he remains upright, clutching a blade with trembling hands as a dark pool gathers at his feet. Will stirs, his eyes fluttering open to find himself in a cold, stone-walled basement. Standing over him is the imposing figure in the skull mask, who coldly notes that the boy has finally awakened. Looking up at his captor, the boy demands to know his identity. The man reveals that he is a holy knight of the Holy Dragon Kingdom, specifically the commander of their order. Because of this shocking revelation, the boy presses for an explanation, his voice trembling as he asks why such a person would commit these acts. The knight dismisses the question, stating that his singular purpose is the eradication of the phantom beasts, and everything else is merely a stepping stone. He continues his cold logic, ignoring the boy's protests about the lives lost and the kidnappings. He explains that silencing the kingdom's leadership was a necessity, even if it required a temporary alliance with the very beast he intends to destroy. The weight of these words leaves the boy speechless, but the knight isn't finished. He bluntly informs the child that the reason he failed to save anyone is simple. He is weak, nothing more than a child. As the boy cowers on the floor, the knight hammers the point home, telling him that his current status as a hostage is the direct result of his own powerlessness. Turning his back on the prisoner, the man prepares to depart. He offers a mocking reassurance, claiming that the mercenary group the boy belongs to won't stand a chance against him. Despite the crushing words, the boy finds the strength to stand, his eyes burning with a new resolve as he shouts that he will never lose. The knight continues his exit, his footsteps echoing in the corridor as he muses on whether the child is even capable of grasping the gravity of his situation. He leaves the boy with a final command to stay and tremble in his ignorance. Now alone in the dim light, the boy's thoughts turn to his companions. He is gripped by the fear that his own capture might lead to the suffering of the only family he has left. He stood alone in the dim light of the cell, his jaw set with a newfound resolve. He refused to simply sit and wait for a rescue that might never come. He would find a way to escape this place on his own. Gritting his teeth, he strained against the coarse ropes binding his wrists, the friction burning his skin as he desperately tried to loosen the knots. His efforts were suddenly interrupted by the sharp creak of the heavy wooden door swinging open. In a frantic attempt to defend himself, he called upon his companions, shouting the command to summon Imu and Kaburo. He braced for the familiar surge of energy, but to his growing horror, the air remained still and empty. The realization hit him like a physical blow as he stared at his trembling hands, finding that not only was his summoning blocked, but he couldn't even manifest the basic body reinforcement he relied on. It wasn't just a lack of focus. His very connection to his abilities had been severed. A memory flickered in his mind, a lesson from his master about a terrifying technique known as magic sealing. He recalled the gravity in her voice as she explained a method used to render a mage completely powerless. He thought back to a quieter time when he had watched her gently patting the gelatinous form of Imu, questioning her about the nature of such magic. She had come to check on him after his grueling encounter with the dead boar, and he had greeted her with the respect due to a mentor. She expressed concern about the reports of his magic running wild during that battle, asking if he was truly recovered. As they sat together in the safety of their camp, she had posed a hypothetical question. What would he do if he encountered a magic user far more powerful than himself? Without hesitation, he had answered that his first instinct would be to flee. She had smiled then, patting his head and praising his pragmatism as the correct choice for survival. However, her expression had quickly turned somber as she warned him that some enemies would use underhanded tactics to ensure he couldn't run. She had then demonstrated the concept of magic sealing, explaining how it could strip a warrior of their strength in an instant. Now, trapped in the cold reality of his cell, he finally understood the true weight of her warning. He recalls Silk's warning from their time together. She had advised him that if he ever found himself in such a dire situation, his first priority should be to flee with all his might. However, she also shared a forbidden secret, a singular, desperate method to break a magic seal if combat became unavoidable. Returning to the cold reality of his confinement, the young boy stares at the heavy door of his cell. He understands now that without magic, any hope of escape is non-existent. The weight of his helplessness presses down on him as he contemplates the necessity of the power he currently lacks. Grunting with effort, he attempts to pull a rope from his belongings, but his lack of physical reinforcement causes him to lose his balance and tumble backward onto the floor. He winces in pain, the simple task proving far more difficult than it should be in his weakened state. After regaining his footing, he discovers the sturdy rope that his master had purchased for him tucked away. Holding the familiar object, a spark of resolve flickers in his eyes as he remembers her teachings and the tools she provided for his journey. He draws a small blade, his mind racing back to Silk's explanation of the mechanics of magic. She had taught him that the magic sealing technique works by physically obstructing the internal organ near the waist responsible for generating mana, effectively damming the flow of power. To circumvent this blockage, he realizes he must take a horrific risk. If the internal pathways are sealed, the only way to release the pent-up energy is to create a new, external exit, forcing the magic to manifest through sheer physical trauma. With a gasp of agony, he plunges the blade into his own side, determined to physically tear open a path for his sealed power. Blood splatters across his clothes and the floor as he endures the excruciating pain, driven by the desperate need to reclaim his abilities. Though he is small and trembling from the shock of his self-inflicted wound, he refuses to yield. Tears stream down his face as he forces a summoning, and in a burst of light and smoke, Imu and Kaburo appear by his side, ready to fight alongside their master who has sacrificed so much to call them. Chaos erupts as the ceiling crumbles, sending shards of stone and clouds of dust raining down. Will stares in wide-eyed shock, the sheer force of the destruction momentarily paralyzing him as the air fills with the deafening roar of the collapse. In the aftermath of the tremor, his companions rush to his side. The young girl cries out in alarm while the goblin warrior, Kaburo, reaches out to steady the battered boy. Will is visibly wounded, blood trickling down his forehead, but he manages a weak apology for causing them such worry. He listens as Kaburo explains that Silk had the foresight to provide recovery medicine, ensuring he would be able to continue. The news of his master's preparation brings a small measure of relief to the boy, though he still feels the weight of the situation. Despite the lingering pain, he grips his weapon, his expression hardening with a grim resolve. He acknowledges that the wounds are deeper than he imagined, but he refuses to let the injury stop him, knowing that the success of their escape rests on his shoulders. They begin to discuss their next move within the cold, stone corridors of the underground passage. Kaburo asks if he is fit to move, and Will confirms that the medicine has helped significantly, allowing them to focus on finding a way back to the surface. The goblin then produces a strange, metallic device, a flare gun. He explains that Silk entrusted him with this signal, instructing them to fire it into the sky once they manage to exit the facility. The young disciple gazes at the object in wonder, fascinated to learn it operates on science rather than magic. The idea of such a powerful tool existing without the need for mana is a startling revelation to him, highlighting the vast world beyond his understanding. With their plans set, they prepare to advance, accompanied by the silent, gelatinous emu. Nearby, two guards grumble about their cautious superior, Lurdelk, unaware that the children they dismiss are already moving to challenge them. The boy looks toward the young girl, his eyes filled with a newfound determination. She watches him, her own fear replaced by a quiet trust in his leadership as they prepare to face whatever dangers lie ahead in the dark. As they move further into the shadows, the guards catch a glimpse of them from a distance, scoffing at the sight of mere children wandering the halls. They dismiss the threat entirely, failing to see the fire burning within the small boy who leads the way. He watched from the shadows as the two guards discuss their superior, Lurdelk, unaware of the threat looming behind them. Suddenly, the small goblin warrior lunged, catching them completely off guard. Startled by the sudden assault, one of the men spun around, demanding to know the identity of their attacker. The goblin didn't waste words, his eyes fixed on his target as he prepared his next move. With a swift, practiced motion, the small warrior struck, his blade finding its mark before the guard could even draw his weapon. The man gasped, his strength failing as he slumped to the cold stone floor. Having neutralized the immediate threat, he stood over the fallen man, reporting that the cleanup was complete. Nearby, the young boy and his gelatinous companion emerged from their hiding spot, the immediate danger having passed. He offered his sincere praise to his companions, impressed by their efficiency. However, the gravity of their situation remained. They knew it was only a matter of time before the guard's absence was noticed and the alarm was raised. To cover their tracks, the slime began to consume the evidence of the struggle while the boy urged them to move quickly. They hurried through the labyrinthine corridors, their footsteps echoing softly against the walls. While they had successfully navigated the initial halls, the main exit remained elusive, and the boy suddenly paused, his attention drawn to a specific area that felt different from the rest. Approaching the massive iron-barred gate, a sense of unease settled over the group as they peered into the dim light beyond. He and the young girl looked through the bars, realizing they had stumbled upon a row of holding cells rather than an exit. Their breath hitched when they spotted movement in the shadows, and he urgently called out to his companion, pointing towards someone trapped within. Inside the cramped cell, a man sat huddled on the floor, protectively clutching a small child to his chest as they stared back with hollow, fearful eyes. He felt a surge of empathy and wanted to intervene, but the goblin warrior sternly reminded him that they lacked the luxury of time or resources for rescue. Clenching his fist in frustration, the boy was forced to confront a bitter truth. His inability to save those who had already perished was a direct result of his own weakness, a reality that stung as he looked at the new captives. He stares in disbelief as Ruark's voice trembles with desperation. The man pleads for his daughter's safety above all else, asking if the small slime can somehow unlock their cage and begging the boy to save her even if he himself is left behind. Refusing to leave anyone to their fate, the boy extends his hand with fierce determination. He declares with absolute certainty that they will all escape this place together, leaving no one behind. As they begin to move, Ruark questions if there's a clear path to the exit. The young disciple admits they are currently just moving to avoid the enemy, but he urges the man to stay calm and trust in the plan he has formulated for their survival. Their progress is suddenly halted by a cold stone wall. The goblin scout realizes with a start that they have run straight into a dead end, the path forward completely blocked. Before they can turn back, the sound of heavy footsteps echoes through the corridor. A sense of dread washes over the group as they realize they haven't just hit a wall, they've been funneled into a trap. A sudden, violent strike catches the goblin off guard, sending a spray of dark fluid into the air. The boy's scream of horror echoes through the stone hallway as his companion is cut down from behind. Emerging from the shadows with a mocking grin, the mercenary stands over his handiwork. The boy can only stare in shock, his voice cracking as he calls out to his fallen friend while the enemy gloats about his arrival. The tall warrior casually explains that since they were proving difficult to catch, he simply herded them toward this spot. With a cruel glint in his eye, he challenges the child to make his next move, knowing he has them cornered. Begonia stands in the center of the hall, dropping a small item to the floor. He remarks on the spaciousness of the area, his voice echoing slightly through the stone chamber. Nearby, the young boy urges his gelatinous companion to look after the goblin warrior. He tells his friend to stay back and stay safe while they prepare for the coming clash, his eyes wide with the weight of the moment. He continues, noting that since they have regained a small measure of their magical capabilities, their only hope lies in a coordinated effort. The goblin grips his spear, readying himself for the signal as he marks the ground. Behind them, the man from the slums and the young girl watch in silence. The mercenary reminds them that they are technically his captives, suggesting they shouldn't expect a simple rescue without putting in the work themselves. The boy's gaze hardens with resolve as he instructs his summons to trust in the plan they have devised. He knows that any hesitation will lead to their swift defeat against such a seasoned warrior. Facing their formidable opponent, the goblin and the boy stand their ground. The mercenary scoffs at the idea of losing to what he considers the weakest of monsters, though his posture remains alert and ready for anything. He flashes a sharp, confident grin, admitting that despite his taunts, he has no intention of taking this fight lightly. He respects the threat they pose, however small it may seem. Suddenly, the goblin lunges forward, his spear a blur of motion as he strikes at the mercenary. The man parries the blow with ease, his movements fluid and practiced as the sound of clashing wood and metal fills the air. He compliments the creature's skill, acknowledging that for a goblin, his spear work is remarkably proficient. The goblin snarls, pouring every ounce of his strength into the next series of aggressive strikes. With a sudden burst of speed, the mercenary moves to end the exchange. He offers a brief, almost regretful apology before unleashing a powerful strike that forces his young opponents to react or be overwhelmed. He lunges forward, his eyes locked on the boy, noting that the child's focus is entirely on him. Will, sensing the closing distance, realizes he has no choice but to strike. Unleashing a concentrated burst of energy he calls a magic bullet. The mercenary effortlessly parries the projectile with his heavy blade, the impact barely registering as more than a light tap. He smirks, his initial assessment of the boy's threat level wavering as he finds the attack surprisingly weak. As the clash continues, his mind drifts back to the reports of a base being decimated by a pair of apprentices and a powerful beast. At first, he had dismissed the idea, assuming only a high-ranking phantom beast could cause such destruction. However, the moment his leader brought the boy into their fold and he heard the rumors of an apprentice's involvement, a nagging intuition began to take hold. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this child than met the eye. Locking eyes with the young summoner, he demands to know the truth of his identity and whether he was truly the one responsible for the previous devastation. Will quickly clarifies the situation, explaining that while the massive dead boar had already been dealt with by the mercenary's own allies, it was his team that had ultimately secured the victory. The veteran warrior's gaze shifts to the small, gelatinous creature clinging to the boy, realizing that the slime had been absorbing the force of his blows, effectively neutralizing his physical advantage. This revelation triggers a memory of his own past helplessness, recalling a day he can never forget. A day that fueled his vow to become strong enough to protect those around him. Snapping back to the present, he finds himself under a sudden, coordinated assault as the small goblin summon lunges with a spear, forcing him to raise his sword in a swift parry. The goblin doesn't relent, spinning its weapon with surprising agility and force, keeping the mercenary on the defensive as the battle enters a new, more intense phase. He lunges with a speed that defies his small stature, his spear a blur of lethal intent that forces the mercenary onto the defensive. Begonia parries the strikes, his eyes narrowing as he realizes this is no longer a mere skirmish. The goblin is fighting with the desperate, calculated precision of a warrior, staking his very life on every thrust. Recognizing the shift in intensity, the veteran prepares to escalate, his hand glowing with the gathering energy of a magic bullet. While the goblin keeps the mercenary occupied, the boy extends a hand, channeling what little mana he can muster through the oppressive dampening field. Begonia is momentarily taken aback, impressed that the child can still manifest even a weak projectile under such conditions. The boy remains focused, his brow furrowed as he concentrates on manipulating the trajectory of his small magic spheres to provide the perfect opening for his companion. The dance of blades and magic intensifies as they trade blows across the stone floor, the air thick with the sound of clashing steel and the hum of arcane energy. Every movement is a calculated risk, a frantic struggle for dominance in the heart of the ruined base. Retreating a step to regain his footing, the veteran realizes the trap being laid. The spear isn't meant to kill, but to herd him into the path of the boy's projectiles. He finds it remarkable that a mere monster and a child could coordinate such a sophisticated pincer attack, forcing him to rethink his strategy against these unlikely opponents. Despite the growing danger, a predatory grin spreads across his face, the thrill of a genuine challenge reigniting his combat instincts. He hasn't felt this level of pressure in years, and the excitement of the duel begins to outweigh his initial annoyance. He begins to chant, his blade humming with a dark, concentrated energy as he prepares to unleash a devastating counterstrike. His focus is absolute, his eyes locked onto his targets as he waits for the precise moment to shatter their momentum. But before he can strike, the boy closes the distance with impossible speed, catching the mercenary off guard with a sudden, aggressive lunge. The sheer audacity of the move leaves the veteran wide-eyed, his defensive posture momentarily compromised by the child's unexpected proximity. A violent eruption of force shatters the air, the impact sending shockwaves through the stone floor as the boy's hidden power finally manifests. Staring into the swirling dust, the veteran realizes with a jolt of genuine shock that this is no longer a simple matter of physical enhancement. He is facing something far more dangerous. Will and Kaburo pause for a fleeting moment to recover. The goblin checks on the boy's condition, and Will confirms that his magical reserves are finally beginning to stir once more. He is interrupted by Begonia, who approaches with a sharp, knowing smirk. The mercenary identifies the boy as a fellow product of the slums, but the young disciple stares back with unwavering defiance, declaring that their struggle is far from over. The swordsman draws his blade, his expression shifting to one of grim understanding. He explains that he truly comprehends the boy's position because they share the exact same origins. He reflects on how the commander rescued them from nothingness, providing food, clothing, and the very magic they now wield. For those who were once discarded, the mercenary band became their entire world. The mercenary challenges the boy's sense of justice before suddenly lunging forward. Their weapons clash in a violent spray of sparks, and in the heat of the exchange, he commands the boy to seize the opening and flee. He had already laid out the strategy, praising the goblin's loyalty while handing over a crucial item. His instructions were clear. If they were cornered, they must split up and ensure at least one of them reached safety to find the others. In the chaos of the battlefield, Kaburo summons the gelatinous emu to create a distraction. They hurl themselves at the advancing line of armored soldiers, desperate to buy every possible second. The veteran warrior carves through the enemy ranks with ruthless efficiency, boasting that a mere few seconds are all he needs to secure their escape. He is a blur of steel, cutting down anyone who dares to close the distance. Taking advantage of the diversion, the boy and the goblin sprint away from the front lines. Kaburo urges him to keep moving, even as the sound of clashing blades rings out behind them. He is left alone to face the remaining soldiers, dropping to one knee as exhaustion and injury finally take their toll. A grim, satisfied smile crosses his face as he watches his companions vanish into the distance, cursing their willingness to actually leave him behind. He stares down the cold steel of the barrel, the sudden betrayal catching him off guard as the situation takes a lethal turn. The trigger is pulled with a deafening crack, smoke curling from the weapon as Ruark stands his ground, while Kaburo watches in stunned silence. The impact of the shot sends the mercenary reeling backward, his body hitting the stone floor as the others look on with a mixture of horror and disbelief. He lies broken on the ground, his clothes shredded and blood staining his skin. Despite the agony, he manages a bitter smile, admitting his defeat and urging the others to save themselves while they still can. Will, however, refuses to abandon his companion. He points toward a hidden passage behind the wall, insisting that if they move quickly, they can all escape the facility together. Ruark questions the logic of helping a man who is just their enemy, but Kaburo cuts him off, declaring that they are comrades now, and that is reason enough. Turning to his small, gelatinous friend, the boy pleads with Emu to help. He asks the creature to absorb the man's pain and injuries, hoping to stabilize him for the arduous journey ahead. The fallen warrior watches the child with a look of profound confusion. He scoffs at the idea of being shown mercy by a mere slum dweller. Yet he is clearly moved by the boy's unwavering kindness. He looks the boy in the eye, questioning what it truly means to do the right thing. He wonders aloud why their lives, which began in the same darkness, have led them to such vastly different conclusions. A memory of the past flickers through his mind, a montage of hands reaching out to guide or to take. He realizes that the simple choice of whose hand one decides to hold can rewrite the entire course of a destiny. He speaks with a heavy heart, confessing that his only true desire was to ensure his comrades were well fed, even if it meant others had to perish. Looking at the boy, the mercenary asks if such a life was fundamentally wrong, but the youth can only offer a somber admission that he does not have the answer. The boy reflects internally on the weight of his own journey, acknowledging that his presence has already brought trouble to the mercenaries and likely will continue to do so. He wonders if the path he has chosen is the right one, or if he is merely wandering into further complications for those around him. The dying warrior stares upward, his thoughts drifting to a future he may never see. He realizes that even if he were to grow old, the true nature of his choices, whether they were righteous or wicked, would remain a mystery even beyond the grave. The boy offers a final, quiet perspective, suggesting that perhaps they are both simply doing their best to survive the immediate present. The mercenary closes his eyes, finding a small measure of solace in the simple truth of their shared struggle. Moments later, he finally pushes through the narrow exit, emerging from the cold stone walls into the open night air. He looks around the moonlit grounds, noting that the signal flares have stopped and he must move quickly to escape the area. While he worries about the fate of his allies, Ruark has already managed to reunite with the young girl, leading her away from the chaos of the facility. The masked man suddenly appears in the shadows, his voice dripping with cold disappointment as he questions the failure of the operation. He reminds his subordinates that his explicit orders were to capture the target, not to let them vanish into the night. He continues his decree, stating with absolute finality that the price for this incompetence will be a double penalty. Charles Noah stands ready at the edge of the woods, her weapon drawn and a fierce determination in her eyes. She vows to protect the boy at all costs until the rest of their group can arrive to reinforce them. A signal flare streaks into the sky, its light reflecting in the eyes of the small group gathered by the ancient stone wall. Facing the masked intruder, the cat-eared mercenary introduces herself with a sharp grin as Nyalko, a member of the Gakiju mercenaries. He acknowledges her title, but notes that while her name is known, details about her are far scarcer than those of her comrades, labeling her a mere intelligence operative. She doesn't seem bothered by the assessment, listening as he reveals they are currently 10 kilometers from the capital at a ruined castle, where he intends to stall for time. Admitting she lacks the raw power of her commander, the mercenary draws her blade, coldly stating that she is more than capable of eliminating a child and a non-combatant before reinforcements arrive. The masked man scoffs at her bravado as she lunges forward, their weapons clashing in a blur of steel and motion. She suddenly invokes a dark technique, the dark curtain, vanishing into a shroud of shadows only to reappear with lethal intent behind her opponent. A violent eruption of dark energy consumes the area, sending a plume of black smoke billowing over the castle's weathered battlements. Emerging from the haze, the masked figure remains composed, calmly identifying the sorcery used against him as a form of dark magic. Having created a momentary opening, she regroups with her companions near a rocky crevice, conceding that a direct confrontation is unwise and they must hold out until their commander arrives. She explains that the individual they are discussing is the strongest person in the Siryu Kingdom. Will listens intently, his expression clouded with a mix of awe and apprehension as he processes the weight of her words. Ruark, however, remains skeptical, questioning if such a powerful figure could truly be hiding within the hollow of a simple tree. She dismisses his doubts with a confident smirk, asserting that regardless of the man's strength, their own commander remains the ultimate power. He looks down, offering a quiet apology for his lack of faith, but she quickly cuts him off. She urges him to compose himself and act with the maturity expected of an adult, demanding he stand firm in the face of their current predicament. While she advises the group to be ready to flee if the situation turns dire, a sudden, violent tremor shatters the silence. Both she and the young boy whip their heads around, their eyes widening as a massive impact erupts nearby. The force of the blow splinters a massive wooden structure, sending debris flying through the air. Looking up toward the source of the destruction, the group sees a lone figure silhouetted against the brilliant glow of the full moon. The masked man stands perched atop a high rocky outcrop, his presence looming over them like a predator. He mocks their attempt at concealment, his voice dripping with disdain as he asks if they truly believed a mere forest could hide them from his sight. She scoffs at his arrogance, retorting that she has no patience for persistent men and that the affection of a single person is all she requires. As the adversary prepares to unleash another wave of dark magic, she recognizes the technique, realizing he is attempting the same maneuver once more. With a defiant grin, she lunges toward him, mocking his decision to engage in a direct, frontal assault. The masked man braces himself, surprised by the sheer speed and audacity of her counterattack, as she closes the distance in a blur of motion. Amidst the chaos, Ruark suggests they find a place to hide in the immediate vicinity to regroup. The young boy, however, looks back toward the battle with growing dread, suggesting that they need to put much more distance between themselves and the masked sorcerer. He realizes that simply running away will not be enough to ensure their safety. He concludes that the masked man likely possesses the ability to warp through space, much like the vice commander, meaning their enemy can close any gap they try to create in an instant. He stands by as the goblin warrior, Kaburo, addresses the group with a sense of urgency. Kaburo insists that if their leaders are on the way, they must remain near the signal flare's location to ensure they are found. Ruark, cradling the young girl in his arms, can only offer a somber acknowledgement of the logic, his face shadowed by the weight of their situation. Because the situation demands immediate action, the goblin declares his understanding of the stakes. He firmly instructs Ruark to stay behind with the others, noting that his own wounds are manageable enough for him to keep moving. He tasks the small slime, Imu, with guarding their current position, while acknowledging that the young boy is also carrying heavy injuries that would normally sideline a warrior. Despite the pain, the boy meets the goblin's gaze with an unwavering resolve that belies his age. Kaburo vows that if the child is determined to head back into the fray, he will follow, asserting that he is still capable of combat. The boy quickly reassures him, explaining that the recovery medicine has already done its work and the bleeding has mostly subsided, allowing him to stand tall. In response to his reckless bravery, Ruark cries out in disbelief, questioning if they truly intend to return to the very place they just escaped. He warns them with desperate intensity that there is no certainty of victory, and that by going back, they are likely walking straight toward their own deaths. As he stares at the child, Ruark is struck by a profound sense of wonder and confusion. He cannot fathom how someone so small can remain so composed in the face of such overwhelming odds, or where such immense strength of character originates in one so young. He looks back at the man, his eyes burning with a quiet, focused intensity. He simply states that the danger and the difficulty are exactly why he must push himself to the limit, refusing to let fear or the threat of death dictate his path when others are in need. He is merely fighting for what he holds dear, Kaburo explains to the conflicted man, offering a final word of comfort by telling him there is no shame in his choice to stay. The goblin encourages Ruark to protect what matters to him in his own way, entrusting the safety of the group to him and Imu. With a final farewell, the small band of unlikely allies prepares to depart, leaving the others in the relative safety of the shadows as they head back toward the conflict. The agile mercenary leaps through the air, her movements a blur as she attempts to find an opening in her opponent's defense. The masked figure tracks her with ease, his voice dripping with disdain as he mocks her frantic efforts to land a blow. Because of his taunts, she intensifies her assault, unleashing a technique known as the Black Vortex. She spins with lethal grace, her blades whistling through the air, but the man in the skull mask remains unmoved, parrying each strike with calculated precision. The clash reaches a fever pitch as she pours every ounce of her strength into a frontal assault. Their weapons lock in a shower of sparks, the air vibrating with the sheer force of their conflicting wills. Moments later, a thunderous impact sends a shockwave through the clearing, kicking up a dense cloud of debris. As the dust begins to settle, the masked adversary stands perfectly still, his posture radiating an aura of untouchable power. Watching him from the ground, the young woman finds herself sprawled on the forest floor, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She grimaces in pain, frustrated by the massive gap in their abilities and wondering aloud when her commander will finally arrive to turn the tide. Ignoring her plight, he looms over the wreckage of the battlefield, his gaze cold and unwavering behind the bone-white mask. With a chilling calm, he questions her foolishness, asking if she truly believed a mere mercenary could ever hope to best him in combat. Suddenly, a new presence enters the fray, the sound of rushing wind signaling a desperate intervention. The masked man doesn't even flinch as the newcomer charges through the lingering haze of the previous explosion. He stands before him now, his eyes burning with a mixture of fear and defiance. The masked figure barely acknowledges the child's presence, noting with bored indifference that such a clumsy approach doesn't even warrant an attempt to dodge. Despite the warning, he lunges forward, his small frame propelled by sheer desperation. The masked warrior catches the strike effortlessly, the sound of metal on metal ringing out as the injured mercenary watches from the sidelines in stunned silence. As he continues his futile struggle, the man dismisses the boy's arrival as a meaningless gesture, stating that one more child on the battlefield will not alter the inevitable conclusion. He shifts his focus entirely, deciding with cold finality that he will end the boy's life before finishing off his original target. He looms over the fallen boy, his presence a suffocating weight in the clearing. Will stares up at the cold steel of the blade, his mind racing as he realizes that if he doesn't act now, his life will end right here in the dirt. As the shadow of the blade falls, memories of Charles brutal defeat flash through the boy's mind, fueling a desperate, primal panic. He can still see her collapsing, a vision that screams at him to find a way to survive. Despite the terror, he notices a faint resonance. The lingering aftereffects of the magic seal still hum within his body. He realizes that in this moment, the volatile energy is actually easier to grasp and control than ever before. Knowing that hesitation means certain death, the youth gathers every ounce of his remaining strength, focusing the unstable energy into his palm. The masked adversary pauses, sensing the sudden, sharp spike in power as the boy prepares to unleash a magic bullet. With a defiant cry, he releases the blast, a blinding burst of raw power that erupts into a violent explosion. The force of the impact sends shockwaves through the air, obscuring everything in a thick cloud of smoke and debris. Gasping for air, the boy watches the settling dust, his body trembling from the exertion. He is flooded with relief that the magic didn't backfire or go out of control, but he remains tense, waiting to see the result of his desperate gamble. The relief is short-lived as a dark silhouette emerges from the haze, footsteps steady and rhythmic against the scorched earth. The explosion, though powerful, seems to have done little to slow the relentless advance of the masked figure. The figure pauses, his voice echoing with a chilling calm as he acknowledges the boy's unexpected resistance. He admits that he had underestimated the child, promising to remember that a boy like him once stood his ground. He turns to depart, his words a cold reminder that despite the boy's efforts, the outcome remains unchanged. He declares that everything was ultimately in vain, leaving the youth broken and defeated in the wake of his departure. Left alone under the cold light of the moon, the exhausted youth stares upward, his breath hitching in his chest. As the silence of the forest returns, a lingering thought suggests that perhaps his struggle wasn't as futile as the masked man claimed. He had bought them precious seconds, a fleeting window of time that might just be enough to shift the tides of fate. As boots crunched against the parched, cracked earth, the weight of his sacrifice began to take shape in the arrival of reinforcements. Emerging from the dust, Begonia and the formidable Commander Rock stood tall, their presence a testament to the opening the boy had carved out. The commander spoke with a low, gravelly rumble, noting that the fruit of the child's struggle was now standing before them in the form of their renewed resolve. They were not alone. Behind them gathered the rest of the company: Warduck, Silk, Charlenoa, and Solio, all recovered and ready to rejoin the fray. It was a defiant assembly, a collective force united by the brief respite they had been granted, standing as a wall against the darkness. Seeing his comrades standing strong, the young disciple felt a surge of overwhelming relief, his eyes welling with tears as he called out to them. The sight of his friends, alive and prepared to fight, washed away the crushing weight of his previous isolation and the fear that his efforts had been in vain. Across the battlefield, the masked man watched through the narrow slit of his skull mask, his gaze unreadable as Sol Leo stepped forward to challenge him. The advisor acknowledged the stranger's immense power but posed a chilling question, asking if he truly believed he could emerge victorious against the combined strength of everyone standing before him. The group stands united against the masked adversary, forming a defensive line to protect the young Will and the injured Charles Noah. Begonia and the others brace themselves, their eyes locked on the mysterious figure who has brought such chaos to their doorstep. As the tension thickens, the masked man observes the group with a cold detachment, noting how they have managed to handle his beast. Charles Noah, though forced to the ground by her injuries, glares up at him with a look of pure defiance. He mocks their resolve, questioning if they truly believe their petty grudges can stand against him. His voice, muffled by the skull mask, carries the weight of ancient malice as he speaks of the holy knights and the fall of a divine dragon, suggesting a history far darker than they imagined. Dismissing their presence as a mere nuisance, he draws his blade with a slow, deliberate motion. He decides to teach them the true meaning of power through pain. Wall can only watch, paralyzed by the overwhelming pressure emanating from the warrior. With a sudden, violent burst of speed, the masked warrior lunges forward. The air screams as his blade cuts through the space where the boy stood just a heartbeat before, the sheer force of the movement leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. Fortunately, Begonia is faster, snatching Will from the path of the lethal strike at the very last second. He moves with the grace of a seasoned veteran, shielding the child with his own body as the ground shatters behind them from the impact of the enemy's blow. He pulls the trembling boy close, offering a brief, confident smirk and a word of praise for his bravery in the face of such terror. Despite the chaos unfolding around them, the mercenary remains a steady anchor for the terrified youth. Their reprieve is short-lived as the masked man gathers his strength, his blade beginning to glow with a terrifying celestial light. He invokes the heavenly sword, a technique of devastating power that threatens to consume everything in its path. The resulting blast tears through the clearing, a wall of pure force that sends Begonia and Will reeling backward. The sheer scale of the attack leaves the battlefield obscured by a thick cloud of dust and debris, the sound of the explosion echoing through the trees. Through the haze, Silk stands her ground, her eyes wide with a mixture of recognition and alarm. She cries out for her master, the weight of the situation and the identity of their foe finally sinking in as the dust begins to settle. She is mentioned as the masked man acknowledges her title, the Phantom Beast Princess. The vice commander steps forward, his glasses glinting as he advises the intruder to surrender quietly, noting that the odds are no longer in his favor. He continues his ultimatum, suggesting that laying down arms is the only logical path forward. Surprisingly, the masked figure relents, his voice calm as he agrees to the terms for the moment. However, he reveals the surrender is merely a tactical retreat. The man in the skull mask declares his intent to withdraw for the day, though he leaves them with a chilling promise. The next time they meet, he will not hesitate to kill. He begins to invoke spatial magic to facilitate his escape. Suddenly, a massive shadow looms over the confrontation. A fierce lion man, a warrior of immense physical power, narrows his eyes at the masked sorcerer, refusing to let the threat vanish so easily. With a thunderous roar, the beast man lunges, his claws tearing through the air as he attempts to intercept the teleportation. A voice cries out, urging the group not to let the villain slip away into the void. Nearby, Charles Noah and the young girl with the beret attend to the battered protagonist. Charles Noah praises the boy's incredible grit for surviving a clash with such a monster, while he, barely conscious and covered in wounds, mutters about how late their help arrived. The vice commander watches the aftermath with a mix of relief and lingering tension. Charles Noah spots him and waves energetically, reporting that they are all safe and inquiring if the battle on his front has finally reached its conclusion. A massive cloud of dust and debris erupts from the site of the lion man's strike, obscuring the view. The warrior himself stands amidst the settling grid, admitting that he put a significant amount of force into that final blow. As the smoke clears, the masked man remains, though his skull-like visage is now cracked, revealing a glimpse of the cold, calculating eye beneath. He muses on the strength of those who carry the title of hero, while below, Silk and the lion warrior stand ready, their resolve unshaken despite the enemy's survival.